Chapter 2351. Could it be that he liked white hair? Wei Bai narrowed her eyes. The corners of her eyes were slightly red, and a charming look appeared on her face. How could she think of seducing him without waiting? A violent gust of wind suddenly swept her into the pool. Wei Bai was about to struggle when the vines of the lotus flower stretched out of the pool and bound her. A relatively small lotus bud opened and sucked Wei Bai into the center of the petals. Then, layers of petals held her again. The beautiful, petite, and tender figure was immediately hidden in the bud. The hazy immortal aura was also swept away, and the lotus platform was immediately visible. The disciples of the heavenly gate sect below the platform all craned their necks, but they did not dare to rush up. When the immortal aura spread out, everyone thought that their master was going to deal with the wild fox himself. However, when the immortal aura spread out, everyone saw that the lotus mark between the heavenly gate sect's ancestors' eyebrows was so faint that it was almost invisible. Everyone knew that when Jin Qian was cultivating the heartless Tao. And the lotus mark was one of the Tao techniques that he cultivated. This was the heartless Tao. The lighter the lotus mark, the more heartless it was, and the calmer one's heart would be. When Jin Qian had cultivated for so many years that the lotus mark could barely see any color. It was also what it looked like before he became an immortal. Unexpectedly, the lotus mark that had never been so deep. It was actually half a point deeper. This, everyone's eyes fell on when Jin Qian's fingertips. The emotional thread disappeared. Only when it entered the soul would the red line disappear. In other words, when Jin Qian had successfully tied the red line with the wild fox. This was simply a bolt from the blue. What exactly happened when the immortal aura spread out just now? All the disciples stared blankly at their ancestor, their master. So, what exactly happened just now? The young man sitting on the lotus had his eyes half closed, and there was no trace of emotion on his exquisite and handsome face. His voice was faint and distant. This fox should be a love tribulation set up by the heavenly Tao for me. The time of immortal cultivation is not worth mentioning. Source tribulation can be postponed. Xian Yi, this little fox will be my 7th personal disciple in the future. In the future, when the love tribulation is resolved, my soul will not treat her badly. Xian Yi was Wen Jinqian's eldest disciple. He had always been calm and refined. When he walked out, the handsome youth folded his hands and bowed respectfully. He said politely, "Master, this disciple will take good care of junior sister." Master was tied with a red string. Instead, he took in the woman on the red line as his disciple. He wanted to resolve the matter of the red string of fate properly, but he didn't want to be tempted. The young man on the lotus nodded lightly. Then, he extended his jade-white fingertips and waved them lightly. A petite figure was spat out from the bud. The lotus flower transformed into a beautiful and dazzling belt, which then transformed into a white and light red dress that wrapped around the young girl's body. Wei Bai was thrown off the stage and rolled a few times before she sat down in the middle of the hall dizzily. Her ears drooped, and her fluffy silver hair fell limply over her shoulders. Her beautiful eyes looked around in confusion. She was so delicate and cute that the disciples of the Heaven sect, who had never had a female disciple, couldn't help but steal glances at her. It was a little pink ball. How could a fox be so cute in human form? When Jin Qian, who was on the stage, also lowered his eyes and stared at her. Then, he looked away. "You look like Lancelot and Xing like a pine tree. Although you are a demon, I hope you have a noble character and are as beautiful as orchids. Let's call you Lanqi. / next time, you will see it when you open the bookshelf. If you like." Chapter 2352. His personal disciples were all named with numbers. After saying that, the young man raised his finger. The huge lotus petals slowly closed. I'm going into seclusion for 7 days. You can all leave. With that said, the huge flower bud had already sunk into the pool and disappeared. Way by, the target was swallowed by the flower. What should she do in the future? Like bees, desperately trying to drill into the petals. To seduce such a target, she couldn't even climb onto the bed. Wei Bai expressed her concern to the system. System, why was the host so open-minded that the first problem she thought of when she saw the target was how to climb onto the bed? Once the ancestor went into seclusion. All the young men who were shouting to kill just now all surrounded her. Wei Bai squatted in the middle. She was a petite ball and didn't know how to keep her tail. She opened her 2 big round eyes and hugged her foxtail. She shrank in the middle and looked at them with some fear. The power of acting cute was too terrifying. Wei Bai actually felt that she was very calm. But when the effect of acting cute was shown, the mist in her eyes and her innocent look were magnified more than 10 times. All of a sudden, all the older men were stunned. Cute, girl paper, pitiful and innocent girl paper. It was a huge blow to this sect that hadn't seen a delicate and cute girl in 10,000 years. Wei Bai felt that she was surrounded by a group of scary strange brothers. Could it be that they were still thinking about how to kill her? Thinking of this, Wei Bai hurriedly looked up. She wanted to say that they were all from the same sect, so please give her a way out. In the end, she forgot her words and retreated. Her soft lips moved, and what she said was indeed timid. Humph. The cuteness was like cotton candy. A lick could melt the hearts of all the older men present. Suddenly, warm pink bubbles appeared in the cold and spacious hall. No one knew who it was, but someone called out softly. Little junior sister. Instantly, they exploded. Little junior sister, I'm Chen Si, your 4th senior brother. Little uncle master, I'm a 5th generation disciple. This was a world that looked at faces. Just a moment ago, they had been yelling for him to be killed. Now, they were all bootlickers. Wei Bai was speechless. This harsh reality really made him happy. Mystic One coughed lightly. He could not bear to watch any longer and kicked everyone out. Then, with a serious expression, he said, Little junior sister, let me take you to your room. Wei Bai stared at him blankly. Until this steady eldest senior brother blushed. With an innocent expression, she hugged her big foxtail, lowered her head, and followed him with drooping ears. He turned back 3 times as he walked. She looked at the pool. When she reached the entrance of the hall, she was still looking at that place reluctantly. Mystic One could not help but ask, why? Are you looking at Master? Although Master is a little cold, he's actually very nice. After all, if it were anyone else, they would have killed the little fox long ago. At first, they also thought that their master would kill her. After all, Qing Si was too domineering. It was better not to be tempted. Even if he was affected, he could still suppress it. But once he was tempted, that thing was like a huge shackle. Even a powerful immortal cultivator like Wen Jinqian might start to listen to the little fox. This was a huge weakness. Wei Bai hugged her tail, lowered her thick curly eyelashes, and pursed her bright red lips tightly. She had a sad look on her face. The cutie seller's loyalty increased tenfold, influencing the people around her. Mystic One felt that he was looking at a cute, innocent, desolate, and pitiful little girl. Chapter 2353. Wei Bai only wanted to lay down her emotions and didn't pay attention to whether it would affect her. She knew nothing about the power of acting cute. Xianyi couldn't help but comfort her in a low voice, Master won't hurt you, don't be afraid. Wei Bai shook her head. Her fluffy curly hair swayed and her ears stood up. She tried hard to recall how the original owner of the body pronounced it. Finally, she found the trick after humming a few times. She had to master the technique of releasing her chi. Wei Wei Bai's voice was soft, and then she said with difficulty, "No. Shi Huan." Shi Huan, eldest senior brother, also had good hearing. He actually understood her vague words. "Like what?" Wei Wei Bai said, and the rest of her words became clear. "Shi Huan, the one who looked at my body." "Humph, like the one who looked at my body." Was that what she meant? Xian Yi fell into a strange silence. Master looked at her body, so she liked him. This, Xian Yi hesitated and asked, "Are you foxes so conservative? Women need to protect their bodies and not let outsiders look at them." Foxes were a race of demons that were famous for their promiscuity. They were famous for being licentious. Did they bring disaster to the country? Could it be that the rumors were wrong? Wei Wei Bai immediately shook her head, and her silver fluffy curly hair swayed. "No, he's good-looking." This sentence was very clear. Xian Yi, she really knew how to look at people's faces. Xian Yi said helplessly, "All right, you're just confused. Let's go first." The love thread might also affect Wei Wei Bai. Although it was said that it would only affect men. Who knew if this thing had any side effects? After all, other than Hong Wan, no one would be crazy enough to use a family's life to create such a heaven-defying thing. Wei Wei Bai immediately held her big fox tail and left with Xian Yi. They didn't notice the lotus in the depths of the pool behind them. The petals trembled, as if they were about to bloom. But they were closed again. It was like a momentary fluctuation of emotions. Soon, it was quiet again. Wei Wei Bai thought that when Jin Qian, that old turtle who liked to go into seclusion, would definitely come out. After all, didn't he accept her as his disciple? Disciples should be taught. In the end, they found out that the instructors were their senior brothers. This was the tradition of the Heavenly Gate sect, and the basics were all taught by the senior brothers. That was why she hadn't seen Wen Jinqian for 3 whole months. He said that he would be in seclusion for 7 days, but in the end, he did not come out of the lotus for 3 months. She didn't have the chance to drill for petals in the pool of water in the Divine Gate Hall. Usually, when there were no meetings, there would be red-crowned cranes guarding the place. No one could enter at all. Wei Wei Bai supported her chin with one hand, and with a face of despair, she took a brush and scribbled everywhere. Tongzi, at this rate, when Jin Qian won't come out of seclusion for 100 years, will he? How were they supposed to do that? Favorability level, 0, the target was in seclusion and wouldn't appear at all. Could it be that she could attack with her mind? The system was currently putting sesame seeds into the dragon fruit. Some systems did not eat the seeds, so they would put a dragon fruit seed into other systems. They could earn half a day's life points. Hearing the host's complaints, he comforted, "It's okay, he will come out. When the time comes, use your cute skills to seduce him." Cute was a thing that had been used since ancient times. Didn't you see that those senior brothers were so gentle to her now that they were a little perverted? Even the most hot-tempered third senior brother, Su San, who wanted to skin her in the beginning, secretly came to see her. Wei Wei Bai threw the brush away. After thinking about it, she could only wait for Wen Jinqian to come out. Forget it, anyway, the time is tentative. I'll just waste time and wait for an opportunity. In the end, she didn't expect that the opportunity would come so quickly. That night, Wei Wei Bai was in heat. Only then did she remember that she was not human. Foxes had a period of heat. That kind of intense, terrifying, and surging feeling was more violent than any medicine. The fox tail that she had hidden well suddenly popped out again. Wei Wei Bai called out to Tongzi, "Give me an ice cube or something." In the end, she found that Tongzi was blocked. In the depths of the lotus, the heavenly gate sect's ancestor, who was in seclusion, suddenly opened his eyes. The lotus seal became hot, bright red and enchanting. A thin layer of red appeared on his beautiful white cheeks. His body, which didn't sweat, also began to heat up and become wet. When Jinqian's heart, which had always been calm, fluctuated a little. What's wrong with him? Chapter 2354. A heartless, emotionless, calm soul. It fell into a burning throb. It came suddenly, like a nightmare. The lotus flowers suddenly bloomed layer by layer, and a floral fragrance filled the air. A white figure walked out slowly and gracefully, treading on the water. The red-crowned cranes on night watch in the hall quietly lowered their heads and lay on the ground, extremely respectful. The figure had long disappeared from the hall. The misty heavenly gate sect was brightly lit even in the middle of the night. Wei Wei Bai lived in a small building on Lotus Peak, and she threw out many of those floating lights. The estrus period was too strong. Even Wei Wei Bai, who was so patient and had seen such a big scene, couldn't stand it. For a moment she could only shrink in the corner of the bed, her whole body red and trembling. This was too unbearable. The system was blocked, and there was nothing to cool her down. Wei Wei Bai was also clear about the current appearance of a vixen and the effect of the cutesy device. Whoever she met outside might be misunderstood as seduction. She admitted that she was still picky and wouldn't attack someone who wasn't the target of the strategy. There was a difference between harming one person and harming a group of people. There was a pool at the door. Wei Wei Bai thought, should she jump into the pool to cool down? How long would it take for the estrus period to pass? In the darkness, a young and weak panting sound was so lingering. A white and slender figure landed lightly at the door, and the door opened automatically. Wei Wei Bai's ears twitched and stood up. Her light-colored eyes widened as she looked at the door. Then, he saw a pair of feet that didn't touch the ground but were instead lightly floating in the air. Of course, she quickly reacted. This was a world of immortal cultivation. Even if there were ghosts, they couldn't enter this sect. Before they could enter, the array at the door would be destroyed. So, she looked up along the feet. The immortal white robe gently rose, emitting light spots of power. The light spots were dreamy and beautiful. On the white immortal robe, the beautiful and exquisite face that looked like a young man was still cold and calm. Only her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her eyelashes were covering her black eyes. There were a few strange fluctuations in her eyes. Wei Wei Bai looked at him anxiously. Her eyes were filled with mist, and the redness at the corners of her eyes was even more obvious. Because the girl was in her special period, her tail and ears that couldn't be hidden were exposed. She didn't seem to know what was wrong with her. 300 years old was too young for a demon. Being able to unlock intelligence was already considered very smart. When Jinqian gently landed on the ground, his feet did not touch the dust as he entered the house. He looked up, and the celestial lamps that she had thrown out returned one after another, illuminating the room. Wei Wei Bai was a little scared. She hid in the bed and wrapped herself with her tail. Her face was flushed and her body was trembling. Her voice was weak and delicate. "Ma master." Someone must have taught her to call him that. When Jinqian's indifferent eyes remained calm, but the blush on his face deepened. He stretched out his snow-white fingertips and touched the bed curtain. "Don't you know how to calm it?" His voice was light and cold, exceptionally pleasant to the ears. But there was no emotion. In the bed, the little fox was silent, but she couldn't suppress her sad panting. A strange fragrance filled the air. It was extremely bewitching. When Jinqian was indifferent, Thin beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Even his long and black eyelashes were drenched in mist. His fingers paused for a long time before he finally lifted the bed curtain. Under the dim yellow candlelight, the girl buried her face in her knees and curled up into a ball. Her furry tail also wrapped around her body. Chapter 23:55. It seemed that this way, she would be able to survive this special period. She had just gained sentience. But she knew etiquette, justice, integrity, and shame. It seemed that when Xian Yi was teaching her, he was teaching her the principles of being a human. So she knew how to be shy. However, some human principles were harmful to animals. For example, during this period, they had to be resolved. He didn't have to force himself to endure it. When Jin Qian looked at her fluffy silver hair, which was scattered and almost surrounded her body, she sobbed softly. "Master, don't look at me. I'm not good like this." Her voice was extremely delicate, and her ears drooped sadly. She looked fluffy. When Jin Qian's fingertips moved, the numbness that couldn't be suppressed was unusually obvious. Years passed. These were human feelings and passion. He had long abandoned them when he was cultivating. It was the first time in so many years that he felt this feeling. He was actually here to kill her. Because this was her feeling, not his. At the end of his cultivation, feelings were already an obstacle. Useless emotional fluctuations should not exist. She had stirred up his emotions with herself. She deserved to be killed. But when she timidly raised her big, tender, and round eyes and stared at him blankly with warm, watery eyes, his fingers seemed to be out of control, and placed on the top of her head. He rubbed it. This action was like a desire that came from the heart. The touch of the fluffy hair that was softer than feathers made the calm killing intent in Wen Jinqian's heart disperse. He was expressionless, and his eyes were cold and silent. His fingers continued to stroke her head. Stroke and stroke. It felt a little strange to touch like this. So he calmly said some polite words. "It's okay. You don't have to resist this feeling. Just follow your nature." For example, she could go out and find a male fox to have fun with for a few days. Or he could catch a few male foxes for her now. At the foot of the Heavenly Gate sect, there was a fox tribe in the vast forest mountain range. There were also some that could transform into human forms. He didn't know if 5 or 6 would be enough. Why not get a cage and throw a few more in there? Then, he would bring them back and put them in her room. This feeling would be resolved. That way, he wouldn't be burdened by her and wouldn't have any thoughts of returning to the mortal world. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly, her soft hair sticking to the side of her crimson cheeks. Her voice trembled as she said, Can I follow my nature? Do you want a male fox?" When Jin Qian thought calmly as his fingers stroked her fluffy hair unhurriedly. Their ears were soft and easy to touch. He said polite words so that he could touch her for a longer time. "Yes, we can comply." There were a lot of foxes, so it was fine to let the disciples catch them. Bai Weiwei furrowed her beautiful brows in annoyance, and her lips were tightly pursed. Finally, she said hesitantly, "But eldest senior brother said," when Jin Qian said indifferently, "I'm the master." "Do you listen to eldest senior brother or master?" Wei Wei Bai's soft eyes lit up. "Listen to master." When Jin Qian nodded slowly. He was as cold and elegant as a lotus flower in full bloom. He was worth teaching. So he let him touch her a little longer. But when he finished nodding, a soft and fragrant body jumped into his arms. His cold body, which had never allowed anyone to get close to him, suddenly had a different kind of warmth. When Jin Qian's eyes, which had always been calm, trembled. Slash. Chapter 2356. However, he seemed to be unaffected by the mundane thoughts and got out of bed peacefully. He disappeared into thin air with the fox in his arms. When he reappeared, he was already in the hall where he was in seclusion. The celestial lights in the hall floated and were exceptionally beautiful. He came to the side of the pool on the high platform and slowly entered the pool. The youth's white clothes floated in the water, and the immortal aura filled the air. The lotus began to involuntarily bloom as he entered. However, when Jinqian had no intention of entering the lotus. Instead, he soaked in the cold pool water. Then, he held the little fox's tail and directly pressed it into the water. Wei Bai had originally planned to follow her instincts and flirt with this old man who didn't eat or drink. Therefore, her mind was really dizzy. She thought that she was going to succeed. However, when the cold pool water entered her mouth and nose, she realized that when Jinqian, this guy who wasn't a plaything, was actually abusing animals. When Jinqian's body was hot, and he let it. However, he pressed the little fox into the water to freeze. Wei Bai kept whimpering, her claws trying to crawl out of the pool. However, she was pulled back every time by Wen Jinqian's expressionless face. Drowning. Drowning again. If you don't drown, you won't be completely drowned. In the end, Wei Bai's entire body was not good. Her entire body was wet, and her pitiful fox face was covered in water. Bai Wei was really afraid of this immortal cultivator dog thing. She could only beg for mercy. Master, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm awake. If she didn't wake up, she would drown here. No. When Jinqian's calm face was still flushed. You still need to continue cultivating. Wei Bai stretched out her claws and grabbed her ears, shouting angrily, "Humph, didn't you want me to follow my nature?" No matter how loud she was, it sounded like she was acting cute. Her voice was too weak and delicate. When Jinqian's eyes darkened and his voice was indifferent. Follow your instincts and be with the male fox. Wei Bai, when Jinqian said lightly, calm down, or be with the male fox. After a moment of silence, Wei Bai's round eyes suddenly teared up in a cute and pitiful manner. She reached out her claws and hugged his fingers. Master, I think you're the best. You're the best. I don't want a male fox. They can't even compare to a 10,000th of you. These words were treasonous. He had taken her in as a disciple because he wanted to cut off her delusions. After all, if the red string entered the soul, the fate would be too deep. He wanted to overcome the love tribulation, and from the very beginning, he had planned to turn their relationship into that of a master and disciple. But he did not expect that the nature of a fox did not have the etiquette of a master and disciple. She still coveted him. When Jinqian's face turned even redder. His ink-black hair fell into the water, creating a black lotus-like shadow. He sighed. Since you don't like male foxes, just drown them in water. After he finished speaking, he swiftly and ruthlessly grabbed the little fox and pushed her into the pond. Even though the noble and pure immortal's face was dyed red, he was still extremely calm. This is the first lesson I'm going to teach you. The path of cultivation is bumpy, and you can fall into demons at any time. You must not indulge your heart. You must suppress your desires. Do you understand? Wei Bai made a final struggle. She reached out her claws and desperately splashed the water. However, a hand pressed down on her fox face, making her only one step away from sore. Just before she died, she was lifted out of the water by her fox tail. Wei Bai was really scared. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she was about to cry. Humph, I was wrong. Big boss, please spare me. The little fox's cute appearance stunned Wen Jinqian. His face was still red. Then, he once again, quickly, forcefully, and mercilessly pushed her into the water. Looks like you won't repent even if you die. Wei Wei Bai, what did she do wrong? She didn't do anything. She just hummed a little. Slash. Chapter 2357. She was pulled out of the water again. Half dead and half alive, Bai Weiwei's hair was wet. She only felt that the distance between her soul and scattering was the next drowning. When Jinqian's blush faded a lot, he nodded gently. It seems that you've learned to suppress your nature. Wei Wei Bai, she had long lost her feelings, but when Jinqian, this pervert, didn't believe it at all. He would drown her at least 10 more times. He put her on the stage. Okay, next time if it's a special time, I'll help you get through it. This sentence made Wei Wei Bai furious. Evil rose from her guts. You old bastard, there's still a next time. If you want me to die, just say it. Wei Wei Bai was terrified. She immediately turned back into a little fox. Without looking back, she rushed off the stage and ran away. In the middle of the night, the hall was brightly lit. The cranes showed hostility. But the hostility disappeared in an instant. They could only watch as the little fox ran away. As for the youth standing in the middle of the pool, he seemed to be carved out of jade, silent and exquisite. His eyes were deep and calm, but there was moisture in them. His long and beautiful eyelashes were also a little wet. The usually cold and upright young man was now a little messy. The lotus beside him seemed to have sensed something and gently leaned over. When Jinqian was indifferent, he stretched out his slender fingers and touched his thin lips. The wound disappeared, but the color was still bright. The heat of the lotus seal didn't fade. The little fox's estrus period was not over yet. The youth suddenly slowly immersed himself in the water until his head was submerged. Finally, he disappeared. But the emotions that had been touched were not erased. Instead, it stayed in his calm and cold heart, waiting to take root and germinate. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 5. When she heard the favorability prompt, Bai Weiwei almost slammed her head into the wall. Abusing her could increase the favorability. She turned around fiercely. Old pervert, murderer, animal abuser. Heartless, shameless. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was really unlucky. In the past, when she tried to seduce others, the worst that could happen to her was that she would be chased out. Nobody was like Wen Jinqian, who grabbed her tail and drowned her time and time again. She clearly did not feel anything in the end, nor did her body heat up. Whatever special period was drowned out by him. In the end, it drowned her. He just didn't like her, so he could just tell her directly. Wei Wei Bai spurned Prince Wen on the night before she fell asleep in a daze. The next day, he was woken up early by the sound of the Heavenly Gate's sex cultivation. Her ears drooped weakly, and her big round eyes were full of confusion due to lack of sleep. Then, she shook her body and stuck out her tongue to lick the back of her hand to wash her face. After washing his face, only then did Wei Wei Bai realize what was wrong with her. Why did she use her saliva to wash her face? It was too scary. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly got up and found that there were already tools for washing her face on the table. He even prepared hot water and used his spiritual energy to maintain the temperature. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly rushed over to wash off the saliva. Then, she clutched her stomach and walked out. Several senior brothers were already practicing outside, all kinds of talismans and flying swords were flying back and forth. Like a little cutie, Wei Wei Bai, who was wearing a pink dress, walked over with drooping ears. Fast fast slash fast fast slash fast. Chapter 2358. They immediately stopped attacking each other. Then they squeezed into a group. Little junior sister, you like pills? Senior brother will refine them for you. You should be about to build your foundation soon. I've refined a lot of foundation building pills for you. The one who spoke was fifth senior brother Nan Wu, the most famous alchemist in the cultivation world. Pills were hard to find. In principle, he would only refine the most difficult kind of pills. He wouldn't refine low-level pills like the foundation building pill. But when he saw his cute little junior sister, he couldn't help but wonder whether she could eat, drink, or act cute. Of course, his little junior sister was more important. Sixth senior brother immediately squeezed over. Little junior sister, I've refined a few attack talismans for you. Put them on you and hit whoever you don't like. If you kill them, I'll bury them for you. The other senior brothers squeezed into a group. They surrounded Wei Wei by so much that she had no place to go. She lifted her skirt and walked to the west. They were blocking the west. If she walked to the east, they would block the east. Wei Wei Bai felt like a panda eating bamboo in a zoo. Even if she rolled around, they would find her cute. This kind of love had nothing to do with love. They just felt that it was rare. The Heavenly Gate sect hadn't accepted a female disciple for thousands of years. They were all a group of men. It wasn't that they hadn't seen women outside. But their own family was always different. Their little junior sister was cute, and they would have a lot of face to show off. As for their strength, they didn't need it. They were strong enough. Their little junior sister was for them to protect. Others had junior sisters to protect, but they could only watch. It wasn't easy to get a junior sister, and she was much cuter than others. Needless to say, they were so excited. Therefore, when Xian Yi respectfully followed his master over, Xian Yi was shocked. Wei Wei Bai was almost curled up into a ball, her ears sticking out. She was so pitiful that she was blocked by a group of rough men. The girl's thin and slender figure was like a willow branch, soft and delicate. Her back was facing them. In the end, she really had no choice. Her ears drooped, and her voice was extremely soft. I want to go over. Bai Weiwei was also at her wit's end with this cute seller. The more people there were, the more the cutie seller would not only have to act cute, but it would also have to force her to act cute. She was clearly yelling, but in the end, this was how she behaved. He was clearly impatient and wanted to walk over arrogantly. The result was a pitiful and miserable appearance. Old Tortoise One didn't seem to like acting cute. What if he likes the beautiful and mature type? Can I refund the reward? That weak voice was ignored by everyone. It sounded like a vague whimper, and no one could understand what it meant. As for the young man beside Xian Yi, his eyes darkened. He was neither fast nor slow, and his voice was incomparably calm. It seems that morning exercise is too easy. I've already swung my sword 10,000 times in front of the door. When everyone heard that familiar and solemn voice, they immediately cowered. Wei Wei Bai also turned around. Then, he saw the young man standing by the pool by the porch. The hazy fog of the heaven sect gently surrounded him. His white, spotless robe fluttered gently in the morning breeze. His long black hair was casually tied up with a hairband, but it didn't look messy. He was holding a book in one hand. His face was calm, and his deep black eyes were empty and calm. It was as if nothing could enter his eyes. When those senior brothers saw that it was their master, they immediately bowed their heads respectfully and shouted, "Master." When Jinqian's thin red lips moved slightly. "What are you waiting for?" Everyone immediately disappeared on the spot with a whoosh. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai's surroundings were empty. Chapter 2359. Wei Wei Bai felt that this group of people's actions were simply abnormal. Now that there were fewer people, her voice finally became louder, although it was still sweet and soft. Master, can I go too? When Jinqian stood calmly in the same place, his clothes fluttering in the wind. His eyebrows were cold and exquisite. The light-colored lotus mark between his eyebrows was like a dream embellished between his eyebrows, full of spiritual aura like a living thing. His voice was calm and cold. No need, follow me. Wei Wei Bai saw that he was not in seclusion, so she immediately trotted over. When Jinqian rarely went out. However, he was always in the bud, so it was difficult for anyone to see him. Therefore, even if Wei Wei Bai disliked him, she could only race against time to be with him. A target that required her to be with a male fox, bah. He saw the girl's fluffy silver hair swaying as she ran. For some reason, when Jinqian's fingers gently pinched the book, his fingertips were a little itchy. He half closed his eyes, and an imperceptible fluctuation flashed through his eyes like broken stars. It was stunning. It passed in a flash, and even Xian Yi did not see it. Then, he whispered something to Xian Yi. Xian Yi frowned strangely, but still respectfully bowed his head. Then, when Jinqian turned around without hesitation and walked forward unhurriedly. However, his sensitive ears kept listening to Wei Wei Bai's footsteps as she ran up. Soft insoles stepped on the ground softly. The hairy girl felt like feathers falling to the ground even when she walked. When Jinqian frowned slightly, it seemed that he was too affected by Qing Si. Why was he thinking of this new disciple recently? The other party's estrus was suppressed by the power of the pool, so it should not affect him. When Jinqian stepped into a door of the Heavenly Gate sect, Wei Wei Bai also ran in. It was a cafeteria. Because the morning practice was not over, the cafeteria was empty. The food here had to be taken from the kitchen behind the cafeteria. When Jinqian sat elegantly on a chair in front of the cafeteria, then, he waved at Wei Wei Bai. It was as natural as greeting a cat or a dog. Wei Wei Bai, however, she still walked over. Sit down. These two words were cold and emotionless. However, it carried an irresistible aura. Wei Wei Bai sat down on the chair and behaved like a good student in front of her teacher. Her ears drooped lazily, and her fine fur stuck to her silver curly hair, looking exceptionally fluffy and comfortable. Her animal instincts were still there. She carefully raised her light-colored round eyes and looked at him warily. Her fair, thin, and tender cheeks had a red mark from sleeping. It was light and lazy. But now, there was a shadow in his eyes. This was the sign of lack of sleep. When Jinqian looked at her calmly and openly, he didn't feel embarrassed at all. It was just that his eyes stared a little too long at the pair of ears on top of her head. Even Wei Wei Bai felt that when Jinqian's gaze was calm, there was a strange sense of morbidity. However, when she thought of how heartless when Jinqian was, she only had a favorable impression of him. Wei Wei Bai felt that his heart might be filled with cosmic matters like the heavenly Tao, cultivation, and soar. He wasn't a freak, was he? Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that when Jinqian wanted her to sit in the cafeteria as punishment, he suddenly said indifferently, "After breakfast, I will personally teach you the rules of entry and the knowledge of foundation establishment. These should be taught by senior brother." Chapter 2360. But he had already walked out of the door and seen her. He had already spoken. Of course, it was his teaching. This logic was flawless and impeccable. Wei Wei Bai was already hungry when she heard about breakfast, but the big boss who wanted soar was sitting in front of her. She was worried that he wouldn't like human food, so she didn't dare to say anything. It wasn't good to have a high and mighty target. Even the strategy felt inferior. Sigh, it was worse than being perverted. Wei Wei Bai immediately rubbed her fingers. Then I'll go to the kitchen to get breakfast, master. When Jin Qian looked up slightly and was silent for a moment. His eyelashes drooped down calmly. No need, your senior has already brought it for you. Just as he finished speaking, Xian Yi had already walked in quickly with a box. Then, he placed the box on the table. Little junior sister, I've brought your breakfast. It's also senior brother's fault. I've been making you eat the same food as us all this time and forgot to prepare your favorite food. Xian Yi smiled gently and said, if not for master's reminder, we wouldn't have noticed. Bai Weiwei was at a loss. She liked to eat lobsters, crayfish, braised pork, sweet and sour pork ribs, and beef hot pot. Suddenly, she heard herself gulping. When Jin Qian's cold voice sounded. Xian Yi, you should have gone back to your training. Xian Yi immediately bowed respectfully. Yes, master. Then he disappeared. The two of them were left in the cafeteria again. The warm smile on Bai Weiwei's lips was gone. The only thing that could smile happily with Xian Yi was when Jin Qian's cold face. She felt that it was a crime to smile. When Jin Qian calmly looked at the smile that had disappeared from the corner of her mouth, he pursed his thin lips slightly. The atmosphere was quiet for a moment. The young man knocked on the table slowly. Eat. Bai Weiwei's lips immediately curled into a smile, then she reached out and opened the lid of the box. She finally knew why the box was so sealed. Looking at their breakfast, Wei Wei Bai and the system fell silent at the same time. Was it the loss of morality or the loss of humanity, when Jin Qian's voice was cold and gentle? Eat. Wei Wei Bai, when Jin Qian seemed a little confused and stared at her silently for a while. However, he found that her eyes were moist, and her small teeth were biting her lower lip. The thin red color added a little more color to her. Was she acting like a spoiled child? When Jin Qian had always been aloof and distant, it was difficult for him to be down to earth. He hesitated for a moment, then used his spiritual power to bring one of the plates of food to Wei Wei Bai. Then, he tried to sound as amiable as possible, although it was still cold and indifferent. Hurry up and eat. You still need to attend your morning class. Wei Wei Bai was so scared that her hair stood up. In front of her was a living earthworm. The densely packed earthworms crawling all over the plate looked exceptionally spectacular. Earthworms, earthworms, earthworms that could crawl around and fish. Her face turned pale, and then she saw that there were still a few frogs and 3 lizards in the box. What the hell was this? Even Bai Weiwei, who had seen all kinds of scenes before, this kind of scene was crossed out, was almost scared away by this breakfast and fled. When Jin Qian saw that, she looked up timidly, as if she was extremely shy. Was she touched? During this period of time, everyone had forgotten that humans were different from animals. He didn't know if there was anything wrong with letting her eat human food all the time. Thinking of this, when Jin Qian's indifferent and beautiful eyes softened a little. I know that you foxes love this kind of food the most, so I specially asked your eldest senior to prepare it. If you like it, ask your senior to prepare more in the future. Wei Wei Bai. The fast. Chapter 2361. She felt, no, she wanted to beat Wen Jinqian to death on the spot and then force him to eat the earthworm. However, when Jinqian found that the little fox's round and moist eyes were looking at him timidly, as if she couldn't let go. Was it because he was here? His existence did put a lot of pressure on many people. When Jinqian stared at Wei Wei Bai's ears and pondered for a while before trying to learn to be friendly. He pointed his finger and spirit energy wrapped around a twisted earthworm. He handed it to Wei Wei Bai's mouth. Come, eat it. He was very friendly and gentle. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. This earthworm was magnified dozens of times in her eyes. Her brain was about to explode. She said to the system, Tongzi, I'm going to eat the earthworm. Is Wen Jinqian trying to use this to force me away? The system said, it's okay. Earthworms are delicious. Such a fresh earthworm will explode in your mouth. The little person in Wei Wei Bai's mind held her head and shook her hands frantically. Don't say it, don't say it. There's already a picture. It's too disgusting. When Jinqian saw that Wei Wei Bai was pursing her lips tightly, and the moisture in her eyes was about to fall, he finally realized what was going on. Didn't like it. He frowned strangely. Foxes did like to eat this. Could it be that she was a picky fox? It was not good to be picky. Her body was already so thin. The scene from last night suddenly appeared in his mind. The young girl was lying by the pool. Her enchanting eyes were sparkling as she looked at him innocently. Her body was like a green branch, slender and fragile. Her waist was so thin that it would break with a pinch. No wonder, she was so thin. When Jinqian sighed. As a master, he had to worry about everything. He even had to consider the nutrition of his disciple. He looked up and said softly, it's not good to be picky. Do you want me to feed you? After saying that, he pointed his finger. Bai Weiwei only felt her lips open involuntarily, uncontrollably. The lively earthworm was about to be thrown into her mouth. A huge desire to live broke through the last shackles. With a whoosh, she turned into a little fox. Then, she was so scared that her hair stood on end and she stepped over the table. She fell into Wen Jinqian's arms. I'll fight it out with you. Wei Wei Bai was so disgusted that she tried her best to take Wen Jinqian down with her. In the end, the power that fell into his arms was incredibly soft. The youth was stunned. A slight fluctuation appeared on his pale face. Because she was a picky eater and refused to eat, his little disciple was, acting spoiled with him. Wei Wei Bai scratched his chest with her claws. He really wanted to scratch off a few pieces of meat. In the end, the clothes were specially made, and her claws couldn't do anything to them. As for the youth who was hugging her, a faint blush appeared on his face. Her claws gently slid across the skin on his chest, making him feel extremely numb. A strange feeling flashed through his calm heart. When Jinqian was silent for a while. As if he had no choice, he reached out and touched her ear. All right, then don't eat. Pick whatever you like. If he was picky about food, so be it. At most, he would prepare more pills in the future for her to nourish her body. Wei Wei Bai stopped tormenting. She couldn't torment him. This guy was like an iron wall. No matter how she bit or scratched, she couldn't cause him any pain. Was this the huge difference in strength? It felt like she was at the foot of the mountain, and he was at the top. And the name of the mountain was Mount Everest. This strategy was so fucking frustrating. Wei Wei Bai was so disgusted by the breakfast that she ate a few fewer buns. When Jinqian must have deliberately disgusted her. He looked like a decent person. In the end, his heart was so black that it could be called sinister. Chapter 2362. When it was time for the morning class, it was in the library. Unlike the morning class, it was especially quiet here. When Jinqian picked up the little fox and went to the top floor of the library, he was as calm as a breeze. He didn't throw her away. He hugged the obedient and furry little fox and let her sit on his lap. Then he opened the book and patiently taught her word by word. Wei Wei Bai didn't even dare to yawn. Her entire fox sat upright. And because of the shadow of breakfast, When she saw Wen Jinqian, it was like seeing an earthworm. For a moment, she didn't have the desire to conquer him. She just wanted to endure until he left so that she could adjust her state of mind before going to see him. She endured and endured. Finally, it was time for lunch. When Jinqian glanced at the sunlight and looked at the tired little fox, his fingers moved as if he wanted to touch her head. However, the little fox raised her head and stared at him blankly with her round eyes. She didn't know what sinister thoughts had flashed through his mind just now. When Jinqian's fingers trembled and he retracted them without doing anything. Then he said softly, "That's all for the first class. I have something to do first." After saying that, he put the little fox on the table and turned around to disappear. Wei Wei Bai relaxed and returned to her maiden state with a bang. It was too exhausting to hide her big tail and ears. She just drooped her ears and wagged her tail around her legs. The consequences of lack of sleep made her nod intermittently. Just as she was about to fall asleep, the lunch bell finally rang. She sat up straight. After getting rid of Wen Jinqian, she could finally have a good meal. Just as she was about to stand up, suddenly, something gently and lightly fell into her hair. It touched her furry ears again. It passed by like a dragonfly crossing water without leaving a trace. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but reach out and touch her hair. Her eyes turned around. She didn't see anyone. Was it an illusion? Lunch was urging her. Wei Wei Bai couldn't be bothered with this. Anyway, it wasn't the ghost world. No magical things could scare her. Other than eating earthworms, frogs, and lizards, therefore, she happily hugged her big tail and ran outside. After that, petite figure disappeared. A figure leaned against the bookshelf and gradually became clearer. His incomparably pure white robes emitted golden specks of light. Under the hazy sunlight, the youth's snow-white face carried a trace of confusion. When Jinqian, who had just left, had only concealed his body. He hadn't really left. He raised his hand. His fingers were as flawless as the finest jade. Even the fate line. It was so faint that it could not be seen. Only the marriage line seemed to be faintly emerging. When Jinqian's thick eyelashes drooped, and his deep eyes glistened. The tribulation of love came too suddenly. He couldn't control himself and instinctively wanted to get close to her. Every day when he woke up, he would feel an urge. Whenever he thought of Wei Wei Bai's round eyes and fluffy hair, he would want to touch them. It was rare for the youth to be at a loss. But he didn't know that he had contracted an illness. Cat, fox, fever. It had nothing to do with love. It was just that he couldn't help but want to touch the furry thing. He wanted to touch even more furry and cute things that were magnified 10 times. It was a pity that when Jinqian was too old-fashioned and inexperienced. He didn't think of this at all. And with this misunderstanding, the feelings that were planted in his heart began to sprout. The hazy good feelings were like the purest roots that began to grow. Ding, the male lead's good feelings are at 10. Chapter 2363. Wei Wei Bai applied for 3 days of leave from the system. In the past, no matter how lazy she was, she never applied for leave. But she was really traumatized by Wen Jinqian, that old bastard. She planned to mend her fragile and beautiful heart. So she planned to rest for 3 days before thinking about how to get close to Wen Jinqian. She heard that Wen Jinqian was 700 years old. If he wasn't a cultivator, even if his body turned into a mummy, it would have decayed. Thinking of this, that old bastard with the shell of a young man became even more repulsive. After hearing her reason, the system fell into deep silence. But, you're already more than 300 years old. Even at 300 years old, he was still acting cute. She suddenly felt that a 700-year-old youth was also very refreshing. Wei Bai, she had nothing to say, nothing to talk about. She and the system fell into a 7-year itch. She wanted to leave him again. Wei Bai, who applied for leave for herself, didn't plan to see Wen Jinqian. So when she heard that eldest senior brother and third senior brother planned to participate in the treasure hunt at Tianshu Hall. In the cultivation world, there were all kinds of treasures. And the best were the various extremely dangerous mystic realms. Tianshu Hall was one of them. It opened once every 50 years. Once 50 years were up, all the major sects would send their powerful disciples into the hall to search for treasures. It had been more than 500 years. There were 10 chances to search for treasures, but not a single sect was able to enter the second floor of the hall. However, even the first level contained innumerable treasures of heaven and earth. The rich spiritual energy allowed all kinds of precious plants to flourish on the first floor of the hall. Not to mention, if one was lucky enough to obtain some of the lost cultivation items left behind by the master of the hall. Because the first floor of the hall was more or less explored. It wasn't very dangerous. So when Wei Bai jumped onto eldest senior brother's Penglai boat, Xian Yi smiled bitterly. Mystic One could only smile bitterly before secretly reaching out to stroke her hair. He said dotingly, "Don't do it again." After all, she went out to search for treasures without the permission of the sect. That would lead to imprisonment. On the other hand, Su San, who had a fiery temper and wanted to kill Wei Bai on the day of her transmigration, lazily rolled his eyes. He didn't say anything either. After all, they were just going for a stroll on the first floor of the palace. There was no danger either. If it wasn't for this kind of mystic realm gathering, there would be more interpersonal relationships to deal with. A mystic realm like the Dubhe Hall, none of them could be bothered to come. It wasn't that this mystic realm was too lousy. It was too good. They would only be open for 3 days, so they couldn't stay for too long. Therefore, other than plundering the first level, everyone had nothing else to do. It was very boring, as if it was a chicken rib. It wasn't that no one was greedy and wanted to go to the second level. In the end, they all went missing. Then, when the 3 days were up, the missing people would become horrifying corpses and be thrown out of the secret realm along with the living ones. The mystic realm didn't allow anyone to live. Moreover, this secret realm was very close to the Heavenly Gate sect. It was under the jurisdiction of the Heavenly Gate sect. The two of them were also there to maintain. It didn't matter if he brought along another little fox. After all, she was too cute. If it wasn't for the fact that Wei Bai was so cute, just based on the threads of affection on her body. Let's not talk about anything else. A disciple like Su San, who was a fanatical fan of his master, was probably still holding a sword and thinking of ways to deal with the threads of affection, and at the same time, kill Wei Bai, who was in the way. In the end, he saw such a soft ball, those round and sincere big eyes that were incomparably warm, and then hugged the foxtail. The only thing missing was the 6 words, "bullied me and made me cry," on her head. Chapter 2364. The sword in his hand suddenly softened. He really couldn't cut it down. Wei Bai expressed that she didn't understand the mentality of this group of perverted senior brothers. She also knew nothing about perverts who sold cute weapons. She always thought that she was still very tough. The Penglai boat was extremely light, flying leisurely in the boundless sea of clouds. The divine pivot hall was on the Green Mountain, and it officially opened the moment the sun set. Looking from afar, all kinds of cultivators had already gathered there. Clouds and mist lingered, and all kinds of flying treasures were extremely dazzling. The Penglai boat was not conspicuous among them. But Xian Yi stood at the bow of the boat, dressed in white, with his hands behind his back and a calm expression. The rest of the cultivators passing by immediately made way for him. The Heaven sect was a leading sect in the cultivation world. There were many geniuses in the sect. Xian Yi was one of the best. He could single-handedly take on a small sect without breaking a sweat. Not to mention the monster level Wen Jinqian in the sect. For so many years since the beginning of the cultivation world, there had never been such a stunning genius in the cultivation world. Therefore, the Heaven sect represented an unshakable authority. Because of Wei Bai's delay in boarding the boat. When they arrived at the top of the mountain, the sun had already set. In the dazzling light of the divine pivot hall, a constantly rotating black entrance slowly appeared. A strange fragrance came from the entrance. Wei Bai's sensitive sense of smell moved, and she felt that the smell was a bit familiar. She originally wanted to ask the system. But thinking that she planned to break off relations with the system, she calmly remained silent. The system, which was eating the black sesame seed and the dragon fruit, did not know that its host unilaterally broke off relations with it. It was still working hard to earn money for the family. When the Penglai boat entered the black entrance, it disappeared at once. No flying treasures were allowed here. Before Wei Bai could react, Su San had already grabbed her collar and carried her into the hole. Then he threw her to the ground. Pick whatever you want. I'll pick you up in 3 days. After saying that, Su San disappeared. As for Mystic One, because she was standing at the front of the group, she was the first to land on the ground. Wei Bai, she suddenly felt like she was a pitiful abandoned child. What was with this miserable atmosphere? He was just here for a vacation. Wei Bai jumped up and patted her skirt. The thought of not having to face old Wen's face for 3 days made her feel refreshed. Wei Bai pricked up her ears and observed her surroundings calmly. The ceiling of the spacious hall was as high as the heavens. There were no pillars in sight. Outside the main hall, there was a messy field of medicinal herbs that stretched as far as the eye could see. Although it had not been taken care of for a long time, all kinds of rare plants were blooming exceptionally vigorously. Wei Bai didn't come here to cultivate, so she didn't have the strong ambition of the people in the cultivation world. She casually plucked a small silver flower. Unable to control her fox nature, she hopped forward. Occasionally, they would see immortal cultivators, but they were all in a hurry. Wei Bai was very calm and leisurely strolled around. After all, once the 3 days were up, as long as you didn't die, you would automatically be ejected. Thus, she didn't need to worry about whether she could leave or not. It was rare for her to have a few days of vacation. Wei Bai didn't think so much and just relaxed. However, in the cultivation world, killing was very serious. In the end, after walking for so long, she actually didn't meet anyone who wanted to kill her and steal her treasures. It seemed that this group of immortal cultivators was of good quality. What Wei Bai didn't know was that behind her, Su San was rolling his eyes while using his sword to stab an unscrupulous attacker to death. Wei Bai didn't even know what her face looked like. Furthermore, she was the incarnation of a demon. Many perverts liked this kind of person. If she was caught, she would either be used to refine pills or used as a cultivation vessel. She originally wanted to let the little idiot fox grow stronger. In the end, a group of covetous people followed behind her, but she didn't notice any of them. What was the use of such big ears? To be touched by others. In the end, the moment she rolled her eyes, the bouncing little fox suddenly stepped into a white hole. Then, she slipped and disappeared in an instant. Su San, the hole that disappeared just now led to the second floor of the main hall, right? If the little fox died, he would be killed by master. When Jinqian, who was calmly in seclusion in the lotus bud, suddenly opened his eyes. Someone broke into the depths of Tianshu Hall. Under his dark eyes, there was a faint trace of red light. His white fingertips lightly touched the petals. Just as he was about to kill the intruder, he found a familiar aura, little fox. Chapter 2365. When Wei Bai missed a step, she instantly turned into a fox. This way, when she hit the ground, it would not hurt so much. When she got up from the ground, she returned to her human form, but she could not retract her fox ears and tail. With the hindrance of the cutesy device, it was getting harder and harder for her to retract these two things. Wei Bai looked at the white fog that covered the sky and ground. She could not see where she came from, nor could she see where she was going. She frowned slightly, and asked calmly, "Tongzi, where is this?" "System, Ding, your invincible handsomeness, the world's most perfect system, is going to the fruit market. I am allowed to take 3 days off. I will only be back after 3 days." Wei Bai, because she needed to rest. Of course, the system also asked for leave to rest. Very good, very perfect, they were indeed the most tacit couple in history. Why did she want to cut ties with him unilaterally? Wei Bai muttered, "Invincible handsomeness, the world's most brilliant 10,004, please come back." System, Wei Bai, you really asked for leave to go to the fruit market? He was so poor that he could not even afford to go to other places. Only the fruit market was left. A burst of poor Tongzi's aura rushed towards her. Bai Wei imagined her family system in the fruit market, shopping alone on the street, but unable to buy an apple with a miserable appearance. Her mood was much better. She suddenly did not blame him. Tongzi did not have it easy either. Wei Bai walked around the white fog for a long time, and suddenly saw a city gate in the distance. She immediately ran over, her fox nature kept reminding her. The white fog was very dangerous, she had to find a place to hide. She ran to the city gate, it was empty, there was no white fog. But it was dilapidated. The huge city gate, half of it drooped down, broken. Some of the bricks beside the door were cracked. It seemed like it was destroyed by a huge force. A cold wind blew past. Wei Bai sniffed, there was a strange and cold smell in the air. Was it the smell of old blood? A fox's sense of smell was too sensitive. It could smell a lot of subtle smells. She stretched out her finger and rubbed the tip of her nose, feeling a little uncomfortable. The white fog behind him became even thicker. Wei Bai had no choice but to enter the city gate. The entire quaint town was like a ghost town. It was empty and dilapidated. All the houses gave off an extremely rotten smell. The dry and cold smell of blood became even stronger. Bai Wei held her breath and couldn't help but quicken her pace. She did not notice that countless black shadows were beginning to move in those old and gloomy houses. Flesh and blood, fresh flesh and blood. So hungry, so hungry. I've been trapped here for too long. I've already eaten my own body, but I'm still so hungry. Don't scare that delicious food away. Let her go deeper. He, that's right, that way, she won't be able to get out. Wei Bai didn't know why, but she felt that this place was very strange. Something was very wrong. She looked around indifferently, lowered her eyes, and thought about what advantages she had to get out of here. After all, she was on a small boat in Penglai. Mystic One told her that as long as she fell into the hall on the second floor, she would definitely die. And she would die a terrible death. She felt that she had fallen into the second floor. She hurriedly left the sect and did not bring any communication tools. Her 2 senior brothers also thought that they would not lose her. Chapter 2366. She even forgot to remind him. Wei Bai sighed. It had been too long since she had experienced a high-level immortal cultivation plane. It caused her to lose her vigilance. She didn't think that it was actually because of the defect of the cute device. People who used this thing would unconsciously feel stupid and cute, and their IQ would be affected. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai had always thought that it was because her life in this plane was too easy. As a result, more than half of her usual calm and vigilance had disappeared. The more Wei Wei Bai walked, the more she felt that the sky above the town was getting darker. It was extremely cold, empty, and without any goods. There was not a trace of plant aura. But there were traces of human life everywhere. Dilapidated houses, candied haws casually placed by the wall on the street, but the candied haws had already rotted until there was nothing left. Pancake shops, cloth shops, inns, taverns, they were all dark and incomplete. There were leftover wine jugs and rotten peanuts on the tavern table. This place seemed to have suddenly encountered something. Everyone had disappeared. Only this empty shell was left. Wei Wei Bai suddenly regretted listening to the warning of the fox's nature, because this place seemed to be. It was more dangerous than the white fog. She hesitated for a moment, then suddenly turned around and walked forward. She had to return the way she came, even if she ran into the white fog. She couldn't stay here. This was not the warning of the fox's nature, but her own experience and judgment to calm down. Then she turned around and ran back without hesitation. Those evil and twisted black shadows silently boiled. She's going to run away. Go and catch her. It's been too long. There's no fresh food here anymore. We can't let her run away. All kinds of gloomy and sharp voices were about to come out of the nest. Suddenly, a beam of golden light tore through the thick black clouds. From above, it was as dazzling as a star. From small to large, it began to appear. The lotus mark between the young man's eyebrows was pure and dirty, and its spiritual aura was overwhelming. The pure white and golden robe floated in the clouds with an immortal aura. The cold and decaying aura began to shatter, and a strong lotus fragrance began to corrode this place. And those black shadows let out silent screams. They struggled with all their might. He's back. It's him. Yes, it's him. He's back to torment us. That little bastard, that damned little bastard, I won't let him go. I'm going to kill him. All kinds of boiling murderous intent, the most vicious cold desire to attack in the world. They turned into hideous monsters and started to climb up into the hellish sky. That dazzling, pure, and powerful light made those monsters roar, but they recklessly stretched out thousands of strange pale arms to grab the high and mighty young man who looked at everything coldly. After so many years, this place is still so rotten and filthy. When Jin Qian watched everything quietly. This was once his nightmare. It was also the reason why he had given birth to him, raised him, and hated him. It's all because of you that we became like this. You still think that you're a virtuous immortal lord. You're just a hypocrite. You killed 30,000 of us and trapped us here for 600 years to torture us. When Jin Qian, you're a monster who's destined to be the bane of heaven and earth. You're vicious. What right do you have to cultivate immortality? You should be cultivating the devil. One sentence after another. It was like thunder to the ears. Vicious to the bone. As long as the young man had a gap in his heart, he would immediately be pulled into a terrible hell. // Chapter 2367. However, the immortal cultivators who were close to the immortal tribulation still looked at them indifferently. The rich and pleasant lotus fragrance in the air. It kept corroding those black shadows. This was the place where his inner demons were. 600 years ago, when he was cultivating, he was possessed for a while. He still remembered what he did at that time clearly after he woke up. He trapped this town and then used a supreme artifact like the Dubhe Hall to turn this place into a gray area that even the human world, immortal world, and devil world could not reach. The people here all suffered the pain of being skinned, tendons pulled out, bones pulled out, and hearts broken. But they died a horrible death. Over and over again, their bodies broke down. But their souls still stayed here, suffering this terrible torture every day. And the hunger in their souls made them crazily want to eat. But there was nothing here. Things could not be grown, and all the animals died. Their souls tore at each other, and they could not eat enough. The most bitter and hateful torture in the world was not half as painful as here. He had indeed done something that even the most vicious of devils wouldn't be able to do. He used this method to torture his enemies day and night for 600 years. Unfortunately, he never regretted it. Even if he returned to normal, he still looked down at this place coldly. The mentality of a human looking at an ant was the attitude he looked at this group of twisted souls. When Jinqian's mentality was calm, and his heart was smooth and perfect. There were no flaws. Just when all the twisted monsters were in despair. Suddenly, there was a small patter of footsteps like feathers falling to the ground. A petite and cute figure wearing a lotus-colored long dress with fluffy and beautiful long hair lazily draped over her thin shoulders. She seemed to be a little scared. She hugged her tail with both hands and kept looking back with her tail upright. This place scared her. When Jinqian's heart trembled. The black fog, the thousands of monsters in the fog. A sharp roar sounded. Thousands of ghosts cried. Thousands of ghosts were filled with resentment. They rushed into Wen Jinqian's body in an instant. That trace of affection for Wei Wei Bai. To become the perfect youth, the only one left behind. When Jinqian's incomparably calm brows finally showed a trace of fluctuation. He made a hand seal. His holy expression had a few more traces of gloomy smoke and fire, and the desire in his heart swelled. The entanglement of countless malicious ghosts stirred his heart. This was an exaggeration of 100 or 10,000 times. The red light in Wen Jinqian's eyes spread. He finally revealed his sinister side. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he sneered. 600 years ago, I could kill all of you. Today, I can also completely destroy all of you. They were just a bunch of ants. Did he deserve to be a stumbling block under his feet? Countless lotuses bloomed from his fingertips and fell into the town. The grayish-white color faded away, and the city gate was restored. The soldiers who were dozing at the gate were very lively. An old man selling wine at the city gate was flirting with the young widow. The hawking of the candied haws sounded loudly and clearly. Every household was bustling with noise and excitement. When Jinqian made everything go back to the past. The black shadows in his body were bewitched by the fragrance of the lotus and gave up on entering his body to destroy his immortal power. Instead, it rushed out of Wen Jinqian's body. When he returned to those fake bodies, his memories also retreated. He felt like he was still alive. The last trace of black gas disappeared into his body. When Jinqian fell to the ground expressionlessly. Then his body began to change. His slender height retreated into the body of a young child. Chapter 2368. He was ugly and cursed. He was born with bad luck. When Jinqian hadn't looked back at his childhood for a long, long time. This was the flaw of the immortal technique, dream return. After pulling everyone into the dream, he also wanted to experience his own experience. When Jinqian's face was expressionless. His hands were hanging down, and his clothes were tattered. He was just being abused again. Then, he would activate his ability and blow up this place. When Jinqian was already mature. The torture he had suffered in the past did not affect him at all. The one who affected him more was his youngest disciple. He had to kick her out of here quickly. This place was too dangerous for a stupid fox with mediocre qualifications like her. Just as he thought so, a delicate and soft body slammed heavily into his body. As a child, he was knocked over in an instant. After all, he had not activated his power yet. He was an extremely weak and ugly child. Wei Wei Bai only felt a familiar lotus fragrance lingering at the tip of her nose. She suddenly realized that this fragrance was Wen Jinqian's. And the rotating black entrance of the Imperial Pivot Hall emitted an almost indiscernible smell. It was also the lotus fragrance on Wen Jinqian's body. Wei Wei Bai fell to the ground. The child in front of her fell heavily into the dirty water. Only then did she see that the town that looked like a ghost town was actually alive. People came and went on the streets. Everyone was talking and laughing. Those who sold wine, those who ate, those who bought things. The noisy smoke and fire actually hit her in the face. If she hadn't seen everything just now, Wei Wei Bai would have thought that she had entered a normal town in the human world. However, these people still exuded an unusually cold and bloody smell. It made her very uncomfortable. Only the child who was knocked into the dirty water was, when Jinqian lay in the dirty water with a paralyzed expression and was speechless. He really didn't want her to see this side of him. After all, she was his disciple. As a master, his dignity was gone. Fortunately, she didn't know who he was. Suddenly, the streets were noisy. One of the middle-aged men selling candied haws suddenly shouted, "That son of misfortune is here again." This sentence was like a chain reaction. The people on the street revealed extremely vicious faces. "My sheep died of dystocia last night. It must be because he entered the city. Didn't we chase him out into the wild to fend for himself? Why did you come back to harm us? He must be here to kill us. Only demons have such strange power." Along with these vicious curses, rotten vegetable leaves, stones, and garbage were all thrown into the sewage pit. When Jinqian's face was expressionless, and his heart did not waver, he obediently lay in the sewage pit. Even when the stone hit his back, he was still extremely calm. The little fox should have left by now. The dream recall skill should be able to rewind to the place that left the deepest impression on him. So today was the day he would be burned to death. And before he was burned to death, he would completely explode the spirit qi in his body, injuring and killing many people. Because the place where he was burned to death was very close to the city gate. The power from back then had also shattered the door and the brick wall. As long as he could endure until the power appeared, he would be able to get rid of the after effects of the dream and this place. At that time, this place would be completely destroyed. That would save him a lot of trouble. After all, he had been tortured for 600 years, and he was tired of it. Suddenly, a sharp stone smashed into his shoulder. The pain made him involuntarily groan. Now, he had no power, and he was like when he was young. The only difference was the change in his state of mind. At that time, he was helpless and desperate. The whole world was a twisted hell in his eyes. But now, he didn't have any fear. He only had calm calculation. The little fox should have left. No matter how stupid she was, she knew that something was wrong here. No matter what happened, she would definitely run away. She was so bold. Suddenly, when Jinqian's collar was pulled, he frowned, thinking that it was some vicious torture again. In the next moment, a soft and sweet embrace completely protected him in the arms. Slash. Chapter 2369. When Jinqian was stunned. However, he realized that he was being hugged tightly. A disdainful snort came from above his head. "What's the point of bullying a child, you bunch of trash?" Wen Jinqian didn't dare to move. His body stiffened, and then his round and still eyes slowly looked up. The girl's delicate jawline was so comfortable that it was flawless. On her lower jaw were small, red, diamond-shaped lips. Her curly silver hair hung loosely on her shoulders and fell on the top of her head. She shook her head, and her ears stood up cutely. The crowd who threw the stones rushed up to condemn her. The person who helps the monster must also be a monster. Kill her. After saying that, the stones came crashing down. Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes and gritted her teeth in disdain. Then, she nimbly jumped onto the roof. Trash, I'm really a monster. If you piss me off, I'll eat you. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai opened her mouth and fiercely revealed her fox form. Her beautiful round eyes revealed an extremely fierce light. Those people were immediately frightened. The evil spirits who were bound by dreams still thought that they were normal people. Of course, they would be frightened by monsters. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly carried the little bun who was suspected to be Wen Jinqian and immediately rushed out of the city gate. However, although the city gate was right in front of her, she couldn't get close to it at all. Wei Wei Bai frowned and muttered, "What the hell is this place? Is the master of Tianshu Hall sick?" When Jinqian, she could only find an empty house and break in. Then, she closed the door in one breath, put Wen Jinqian down, and blocked the door with a table. Then, she heaved a sigh of relief and turned around. She saw the child she saved was covered in filth and rags. Red lines spread out on the left side of his face like blood vessels. On the right side of his face, his beautiful and pure skin like a snowball made the left side of his face a nightmarish contrast. It was extremely beautiful and extremely terrifying. The impact was strong. His eyes were as deep as a cold spring in the dark, and there was an invisible emotion surging. It made people feel oppressed and dangerous. Wei Wei Bai's pointed ears perked up. She seemed to be a little nervous as she grabbed her skirt and stared at him with wide eyes. He was the child that she had saved. Why did he feel that she was so pitiful? Wei Wei Bai, who didn't know the power of acting cute, thought that she was very mature. After all, she was so arrogant just now that she almost made the whole world her enemy. She had wanted to avoid this child who was suspected to be Wen Jinqian. After all, this place was full of mysteries. The system asked for leave again. After calmly analyzing the situation, she felt that she had to think of a way to get out. However, the experience of the strategy was too misleading. The lotus fragrance at the entrance of the Imperial Pivot Hall. The second floor of the main hall was a strange place, and everyone was a dead person. She smelled the scent of a living person on this child, and it was the scent of Wen Jinqian. What was even more amazing was when he raised his head. If she blocked the ugly left side of the face, wouldn't the right side be Wen Jinqian? Although he had become smaller, Wen Jinqian, who was about to cross the sore tribulation, had become stronger because of his overflowing power. His physical condition was maintained at that of a teenager. Apart from his height, his face was a little more delicate. This child was so similar to that teenager that anyone who wasn't blind would know that they were related. Wei Wei Bai had been tortured by countless planes to the point where her hunting instincts were born. Even without the system's reminder, she still instinctively grabbed Wen Jinqian and ran. / at the bottom to record this reading record. Chapter 2370. As long as there was a 1 in 10,000 chance that this guy was Wen Jinqian. She couldn't let anything happen to him. Wei Wei Bai would rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let one go. She decided to cancel her leave and enter work mode. "So, when are you coming back? Your host is working." When Wen Jinqian saw the little fox, he stared at her warily and cautiously wanted to approach her. His indifferent and distant black eyes drooped slightly, his eyelashes covering half of his cold, spring-like pupils. There was actually a hint of confusion. As if testing, his childish and calm voice sounded unhurriedly. "Why? Save me." 4 simple words. But with a kind of oppressive deterrence. As expected, when he saw the little fox in front of him, his naturally sensitive pupils shrank. But she pursed her small lips and said with a frown, "I don't like to see children beaten." It was such a simple reason, so she took action. In this dangerous and strange place, she carried him and ran. She wasn't afraid. He was really a monster. Or was it a trap? When Jin Qian stared at her indifferently for a while, then gently looked away, his eyelashes trembling. "It's very dangerous here. You can't run away with me." If she was left alone, she could run out of the city gate. But once she carried him, he was the core existence of this place. The side effects of the dream were all on him. As long as he wasn't burned to death, he couldn't break out of this childhood dream. Then, she couldn't leave this place with him in her arms. A hand was suddenly placed on the top of his head. His messy and dirty hair was ruthlessly rubbed by someone. There was no disdain, only intimacy. When Jin Qian was stunned for a moment, he looked up and saw the girl frowning. "What are you talking about? You're very powerful." She smirked proudly, revealing a sly and cute smile. "Do you know the Heaven sect?" When Jin Qian didn't answer, still looking indifferent, Wei Wei Bai stretched out her hands and drew a huge distance. "That place is very, very big. There are many, many powerful people there. Do you know who the most powerful one is?" When Jin Qian couldn't help but ask softly, "Who is it?" That soft childish voice actually had a trace of curiosity. Wei Wei Bai immediately smiled, and the light in her eyes was exceptionally beautiful. "Of course it's my master, Wen Jin Qian. He's the most powerful immortal cultivator. When he's angry, he can make a mountain disappear with a raise of his hand. With a stomp of his foot, he can make all the fish in the sea fly out. If my master were to come here, he would definitely be able to solve this damned place with just a stretch of his finger." When Jin Qian raised his eyebrows slightly, there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "Oh, it does sound powerful, but he doesn't know you're here." Wei Wei Bai immediately patted her chest and said with a smile, "My master likes me the most. He will definitely come to save me. You will definitely be saved if you follow me." The coldness and viciousness in Wen Jinqian's heart was burned by her little smugness and flaunting. He smiled faintly. "It seems that you like your master very much." Wei Wei Bai suddenly fell silent. Traces of red slowly appeared on her pink cheeks, and her ears shyly drooped down, sticking to her silver hair. Then she reached out and hurriedly covered her face. "Don't say such things. Although I like him very much, I can't say it out loud." When Jin Qian, who had just casually said, "Then," he seemed to have realized something. His gaze fell on the gap between the girl's fingers, and the flushed skin stained with red, //. Chapter 2371. After a long time, he lowered his long and thick eyelashes. He couldn't help but clench his fingers, as if he was at a loss. It must be the influence of the love. When Jin Qian thought uncertainly. But he couldn't help but feel a little better. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 15. Wei Wei Bai, confirmed, 100%, no need for the system to check. He was Wen Jin Qian. This damned place must have a lot to do with Wen Jin Qian. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become a child without any ability. He couldn't leave yet. Bai Wei Wei felt that her luck was like dog shit, full of the uncertainty of fate. She could meet a target just by taking a leave. Usually, when she wanted a strategy, she couldn't even find a trace of him. Wei Wei Bai looked thoughtful. Under the influence of the cute atmosphere, the corners of her lips drooped slightly, and her light-colored eyes were soft and moist. Her big tail drooped weakly. It made one's heart ache. When Jinqian's indifferent and cold expression softened. After all, she was a little fox with no cultivation. Even if she forced herself to hold on, she was actually afraid. He stared at the ears on the top of her head. His fingertips itched, and his fingers were already reaching out. However, he ignored his own height. Just as his fingers were about to touch her head, Gu Nianji stopped him. Wei Wei Bai pricked up her ears, and her eyes showed vigilance. She quickly turned around. When Jinqian's fingers fell straight on her big tail. The tail was actually not very big. It was covered in fluffy hair, so it looked abnormally hairy. His fingers felt like they were touching a cloud of mist. It was unusually comfortable. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened, and her ears turned red. Her voice trembled. Don't touch." His fingers froze, and he immediately let go. He couldn't help but stand with his hands behind his back. This action was unusually cool, and he could even hide his fingers from touching her tail, killing two birds with one stone. Unfortunately, he forgot that he was a child. This action didn't feel pretentious at all. It was only cute. Wei Wei Bai immediately hugged her tail and turned to glare at him with a red face. However, that delicate and weak gaze, that blushing face, and those beautiful big, moist eyes, they all gave people a feeling of being ravaged. When Jinqian's breathing paused, and he lowered his head slightly. His messy black hair covered his deep eyes, revealing only a thin and fragile neck. He was extremely quiet and silent. Wei Wei Bai didn't mind, but when she saw a lot of people suddenly appear outside the window, she frowned with a bad feeling. She turned around and reached out to hug the dirty Wen Jinqian. When Jinqian's expression froze as she pulled him into her arms. Then the two of them hid in an empty closet. She half opened the wardrobe door and gently shushed him with her finger, signaling him to remain silent. On the other hand, when Jinqian looked down and saw that her beautiful lotus dress was stained with dirt from him. But she didn't care. She should like this dress very much. When she was transforming, he casually broke off a lotus flower and turned it into a fairy dress. It was a treasure. It cleaned automatically and wouldn't be contaminated by dust. If she wore it all the time, she would be stained with a strange fragrance and wouldn't have a trace of dirt. So she often wore this dress because she didn't know that this dress would clean itself. Chapter 2372. She had been washing it and wearing it the next day. Did she like it so much because it was a gift from him? And because in his nightmares, the lotus ability did not work, and the dirty plot function was gone. That was why the stains on his body could leave traces on her dress. Wei Wei Bai had no idea what little Wen Jinqian was thinking. She closed the closet door warily. Wen Jinqian definitely knew what those monsters outside the house were. So as long as she didn't court death and hid with him, everything would be fine when the time was up. She had experienced too many miracles when it came to the target's luck. Sometimes she felt that even if the whole world died, the target would be fine. Awe, jealousy, envy. Her heart was very moved and she wanted it very much. Wei Wei Bai quietly hugged Wen Jinqian and sat obediently in the closet. She knew that her dress was dirty. She liked this dress because it had its own temperature adjustment function. It was close-fitting and sweat-absorbing. It was like a small mobile air conditioner. Anyone who wore it knew that it could be sold at a price of 100,000 yuan. She didn't know what was wrong with this place. Her dress felt like it had lost its temperature adjustment function. It could be washed even if it was dirty. The air conditioner was broken. Could it be that she should ask Wen Jinqian to make another one. It wasn't good to ask him to be a tailor when his favorability was so low. If she could leave this place, the dress might be fine again. Wei Wei Bai helplessly leaned her chin against the head of the child in her arms, not at all disgusted by the stench on his body. She whispered softly, "I don't know when we can get out." Wen Jinqian was silent for a moment, then looked down and said calmly, "Wait for your master to come and save you." Wei Wei Bai muttered, "Then he has to come quickly." Wen Jinqian's thin lips, which had lost their color due to malnutrition, pursed slightly. Finally, after a long silence, he seemed to be humming, and his voice was extremely soft. "He will come." His tone unconsciously carried a hint of helpless doting. After hiding for a long time, when Jinqian suddenly heard a soft rumbling sound, he had some doubts. However, he quickly reacted and calmly looked up, only to see Wei Wei Bai gently biting her pink lower lip with her small pearly white teeth. She was hungry. The little fox had yet to reach Foundation establishment. Although it had become a spirit monster, it was still unable to break free from the shackles of food. Wen Jinqian had been away from this stage for too long. As a result, he didn't think too much about it. He gently lowered his eyelashes, and his deep black eyes became a little more gentle. Then, he stretched out his slender fingers and slowly held her hand. His childish voice was still calm and cold. "Come with me." Wei Wei Bai had been curled up for too long and was not in good spirits. When she heard Wen Jinqian's voice, she immediately trembled and her ears perked up. She tilted her head in confusion. "What's wrong?" Wen Jinqian said softly, "Eat." Wei Wei Bai's round eyes lit up with longing. "Is there anything to eat here?" Wen Jinqian's thin pink lips curled up slightly, and his indifferent expression had a hint of warmth. "Yes. Let's go out. They're not here anymore." The ability of the dream was very special. Those people had already forgotten that they were monsters. They would only follow their instincts to catch him and burn him to death. If they couldn't catch him today, the dream would restart the next day. This day would repeat forever. They wouldn't be free until they tied him to a burning pile of firewood. Therefore, this place was actually not very dangerous. After all, it wasn't a big deal for him to be burned again. Wei Wei Bai reached out and pushed open the wardrobe door. Sure enough, it was silent outside. She let out a small sigh of relief. Wen Jinqian originally wanted to go down by himself. However, before he could react, Wei Wei Bai had already hugged his waist with both hands and his legs with one hand, hiding him in her arms. It was as if she was hiding a treasure. Because of this unexpected hug, Wen Jinqian couldn't help but grab her clothes with his small hands. He was a little embarrassed, which was rare. "I will go by myself." Wei Wei Bai snorted in disdain. "You're too slow. You have short arms and legs." After saying that, the little fox quickly scurried out and sneaked out of the empty house. It smelled like sugar cake. Were all girls so sweet? / Chapter 2373. Wen Jinqian's heart skipped a beat, but he lowered his long eyelashes as if nothing had happened and remained silent. He pointed to an extremely hidden alley, and Wei Wei Bai jumped up. The alley was remote and cold. Trash was scattered everywhere, emitting a foul smell. Wen Jinqian was indifferent. On the contrary, Wei Wei Bai couldn't stand it and sneezed. Her sense of smell was very sensitive, and many smells were magnified dozens of times and rushed into her nose. It was a little uncomfortable. The girl couldn't help but reach out and use her sleeve to rub her nose. The tip of her nose turned red. She was a little curious and looked around with her round eyes. She didn't seem to know what to eat here. And when Jinqian, who had always been cold, also felt a little embarrassed. He pointed to a small hole. "Let's go in here." Wei Wei Bai stared at the small hole in a daze. Then she reached out and gestured. Yes, it was a little small. When Jinqian was silent for a moment, he had forgotten that the little fox was actually in the form of a young girl. This small hole could be drilled into by a child. If it was a little bigger, it would get stuck. Did he have to dig it out? He looked at his weak and fragile fingers, his extremely tender hand bones. For the first time, he felt that he was very useless. Suddenly, he heard a bang beside his ear. A little white fox landed on the ground. Her eyes were elongated because she turned into a fox, and they were oval and black, unusually cute. Her fluffy tail swept across Wen Jinqian's calf, and the furry touch and numb feeling suddenly rushed up. Wen Jinqian's body stiffened. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and he didn't dare to move. The little fox didn't notice his abnormality at all. She scuttled into the hole and popped her head out. "Come in." Wen Jinqian was silent for a while. His deep eyes stared at her for a while before he bent down and followed her tail into the hole. In his childhood, to survive, he had once made a hole in this place. Because the hole was a basement. He didn't know who left it. It was full of spiritual energy. After he escaped from here in his childhood, except for the revenge of being possessed by demons 600 years ago, he didn't think of this place at all. So even if he knew that there was spiritual energy in this place, there must be treasures or spiritual land. But he was still not interested. This place was sealed by him using the power of the Alpha Hole. It did not rise from the ground and suddenly disappear. It was still in its original place. However, if one was unable to break through the power of the divine pivot hall, it would be impossible to see this place. Therefore, the things that were left behind back then still existed and were preserved. When Jinqian fell into the basement from the hole. In this gloomy and dark place, there was indeed an incomparably fresh spiritual energy. The enclosed environment was surprisingly refreshing. When Jinqian skillfully took out an oil lamp from the table and lit it. Then, he went to a corner and untied a piece of gray-white cloth. A green plant appeared. There were small orange fruits on it. This was his food. He found a sweet fruit plant in the wild. The sugar content of the sweet fruit was unusually high. It was very delicious and could also fill the stomach. It was a delicious meal that was often hungry in the past. However, it would take a month for a dozen sweet fruits to grow. And because he had not returned for a long time, this very small sweet fruit tree had already grown very tall. There were also hundreds of fruits. The little fox didn't like to eat earthworms. She should like things that were full of spiritual energy. After all, her taste was sweet. It must be because she liked to eat sweet things that the taste had been permeated all year round and marinated her skin. Chapter 2374. As expected, the little fox circled the fruit tree in surprise. The white fox's tail swayed like a cloud. When Jinqian stood with his hands behind his back, looking at her coldly and calmly, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up slightly. Wei Wei Bai turned back into a girl and reached out to pick the sweet fruit. "Is this for me to eat?" When Jinqian nodded indifferently. "Eat it, it can fill your stomach." Wei Wei Bai quickly picked more than a dozen fruits, then squatted in the corner with the fruit in her hands and lowered her head to eat. Old monster one shouldn't eat it, right? Wei Wei Bai, in her silly and cute state, narrowed her eyes, holding the fruit and biting it sweetly. Suddenly, she remembered that old monster one didn't know that she knew who he was. So he should be an ordinary child. She needed to share the fruit with him. Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment and deliberately went to count the fruits on the tree. Yes, it was enough. So she reached out and spread her white fingers, and 2 sweet fruits appeared in her palm. You eat too. When Jin Qian was about to shake his head. He was the core person in the dream, and he didn't need food. He was no different from those monsters outside. He casually moved his eyes away from an extremely shabby ancient mirror on the wall. Inside, he saw himself in a mess. His dirty and messy long hair was tangled into clumps full of dirt, sticking to the back of his neck, and half covering the red lines on the left side of his face. In the gaps of his dirty hair, the strange and twisted red lines were as ferocious as blood vessels. This was him, a monster like him. He was destined to be abandoned by everyone. When Jin Qian lowered his round and cold eyes, and the corners of his mouth slowly revealed a dark and cold smile. Sure enough, he could never like the time when he was a child. Shame and coldness, madness and pain, when Jin Qian's indifferent heart slowly froze, and even his eyes were changing. That bit of warmth was once again cruelly shattered. He was about to become that cold and inhumane immortal cultivator again. A half-bitten fruit gently pressed against his lips, and the moist and sweet fruit fragrance rushed into the tip of his nose. Her dry lips were moistened by the juice. When Jin Qian frowned and was about to say something. Just as he opened his mouth, the fruit was forcefully stuffed into his mouth. The sweetness rushed into his mouth. He didn't like the taste of fruits that tasted like sweet water. They had to eat to survive. After leaving this place, he became less and less interested in sweet things. But when the fruit melted in his mouth, the little fox in front of him was looking at him with a smug look on her face. Her flower-like red lips were slightly curved upwards, and her light-colored eyes were as warm and sweet as the fruit in her hand. When Jin Qian was stunned for a while before he blinked and turned his face away. His calm state of mind was pried open by this trace of sweetness. It didn't seem that bad after all. Wei Wei Bai was already half full, and she had counted a lot of fruits. Therefore, he generously gave old Freak Wen several fruits. She originally thought that he would refuse. After all, this old guy didn't eat anything. According to the guys in the Heavenly Gate sect, he didn't like sweet things a long time ago. Such sweet fruits, even if she gave him a few, they would still be thrown back in the end. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai was very generous. When Jin Qian was holding 3 fruits in his hand, the orange-yellow fruits were very small and beautiful. Only the right side of the dirty child's face was as white as a powder ball, and his thin lips were still weak and bloodless. Chapter 2375. The left side of his face was in the darkness, with a hint of treacherous depth. His lonely eyes were quiet and calm. Finally, he picked up the fruit and slowly put it into his mouth. The sweetness exploded on the tip of his tongue. He still didn't like it. But when he saw the girl holding the fruit squatting and smiling at him, he felt that the taste was actually quite good. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 20. Wei Wei Bai watched as the fruit was eaten. What happened to not liking sweet things? What happened to not eating? Old one lied. After eating the fruit, Wei Wei Bai burped. Then she lazily supported her chin with both hands and looked around, as if curious about this small and dark place. Her round eyes were bright and beautiful, without any disdain. Instead, they revealed the pure nature of animals. She frowned and asked strangely, "Is this where you live?" When Jin Qian's expression turned cold. In fact, it didn't matter if he said that he lived here. He had always been cold-hearted and didn't care about suffering. He didn't have any bad habits of vanity. So, the little child's childish and cold eyes gently looked up. His long eyelashes quietly drooped, but for some reason, he trembled uneasily. No, it's a place I found by chance. The place where I live is much better than here. He was no longer the child from 700 years ago. The place where he lived now was the heavenly mountain with the best spiritual energy in the entire immortal cultivation continent. All cultivators yearned for it the most. The scenery there was beautiful and the environment was excellent. The buildings everywhere were as beautiful as a dream. There were a bunch of cranes and deer. No one's place could compare to the Heavenly Gate sect. So he wasn't lying and was telling the truth. Old Wen, whose face had grown thicker with time, thought so calmly. He casually raised his head coldly. His childish little face had the depth of an expert. In the future, I'll take you to where I live. His room was only in the middle of the pool. The lotus was like a mustard seed, a tiny speck of dust, yet boundless. He allowed her to enter his room and stay for a short while. Wei Wei Bai simply could not see what was so cool about Turtle Wen, whose face was covered in dirt and gave off the smell of poverty from head to toe. She couldn't bear to watch this pretentious act anymore. Wei Wei Bai reached out her hand and patted his head. Oh, okay, I'll visit your house in the future. By the way, what's your name? Damn it, I almost exposed myself. In the end, he forgot to introduce himself. Old Monster Wen was not someone who could be easily fooled. He could not think of anything strange at the moment. In the future, when he went out, he would calm down. He would not suspect why she did not introduce herself. After all, in eccentric Wen's eyes, she should not know him. How could someone who didn't know him not ask for his name from the beginning to the end? Unless they knew each other. Wei Wei Bai indeed knew her, which was why she had forgotten to introduce herself. She secretly patted her forehead with her hand. Was she mentally retarded? How could she make such a low-level and childish mistake? Was it because he was too tired? Or was it because Tongzi was no longer around and her IQ had followed him to the fruit market? When Jin Qian's indifferent expression froze. What name? Wen Jinqian. But how could she introduce herself like that? He could not help but look sideways at himself in the bronze mirror. Disheveled, ugly, weak. It would not be an exaggeration to throw the world's most vicious adjectives at him at this moment. In this state, he could not let her know that he was her master. Otherwise, how could he teach his disciples in the future? As a teacher, he must be perfect and flawless. Chapter 2376. When Jinqian's gaze moved down slightly and looked at his shabby and dirty little shoes. The shoes were so close to revealing the thumb hole. No matter how thick-skinned he was this time, he felt a little embarrassed. His thin and unhealthy cheeks were stained with an inconspicuous shade of red. His calm black eyes couldn't control themselves and actually wandered a few times. His voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. My name is Xiao Qian, what kind of lousy name was this? When Jin Qian regretted it as soon as he said it. He just suddenly remembered that before he became ugly. When he was called by his name, it seemed like this was his nickname. It was too smooth, a lousy name that couldn't stand the wind. He should have taken a more domineering name. Wen Jintian or Long Mia sounded good. When Jin Qian was just about to change his name, two hands had already landed on his small shoulders. A cute and innocent face leaned over. Wei Wei Bai gave him a bright and warm smile. Xiao Qian, hello, my name is Xiao Wei. When Jin Qian's eyes were dull for a moment, reflecting her happy smile, he was momentarily speechless. Wei Wei Bai automatically climbed up the pole. She said seriously, after exchanging names, we will be best friends in the future. It wasn't easy to gain favorability. First, she had to cozy up to a big boss and make friends. When Jin Qian was silent for a long time, Finally, he lowered his eyes and sighed softly. Yes, friends. Wei Wei Bai smiled and stretched out her fair and tender little finger. She gently bent it. Come, make a pinky promise. When Jin Qian, why did he have to do such a boring and childish thing with her? It was fine if the little fox was stupid. It was only his body that was retreating, not his brain. He was actually as stupid as her. When Jin Qian wanted to reject, he stretched out his small hand and wanted to slap her finger away. He also wanted to warn her that the current environment was dangerous and unknown. How could she let down her guard like this? Even if it was him, she should know that he was unfamiliar and dangerous. She shouldn't trust him like this. But as she stretched out her finger, as if she couldn't control it, the pinky that was a size smaller than hers also bent. Then, he held her finger. He shook his head slowly. When his fingers touched his skin, he felt a strange itch. When Jin Qian's cold little face tensed up even more. It was frighteningly cold. As expected, his brain had regressed. Wei Wei Bai quickly followed suit and said, Retractor. Don't change it for 100 years. When Jin Qian corrected him calmly. 10,000 years. What's the use of 100 years? In the immortal cultivation world, there were thousands of old monsters everywhere. Would 100 years be enough to fill the gap between their teeth? He was also over 700 years old. Wei Wei Bai immediately changed her words. 100,000 years, 100 million years. Whoever changes is a puppy. When Jin Qian was speechless. He was silent for a long time before he finally sighed and lowered his head. His slender little neck was also slumped. Forget it, just treat it as teaching a disciple. His disciple was so stupid that he couldn't teach her anything profound. Once she liked something, he would play with her. Only then would he become a talent. After convincing himself, Old Monster One finally let go of the psychological burden of acting pretentious. Although his voice was calm, he couldn't help but lower it. No change. After eating, Wei Wei Bai lay on the table and narrowed her eyes with a satisfied expression. When Jin Qian saw her furry fox tail wrapped around his body. That cloud-like touch was really soft and comfortable. He stopped this thought and stopped the itchy feeling in his fingers. Slash. Slash. Chapter 2377. Wei Wei Bai lay on her stomach, her eyes completely closed, and her eyelashes covered her eyes. She fell asleep. When Jin Qian looked at her silently for a long time before slowly walking forward. He planned to go out now, be caught, and be burned to death. Only then could he stimulate the power in his body and break through this dream. Otherwise, the little fox would be with him and wouldn't be able to get out. When Jin Qian reached out and was about to climb up when he suddenly thought of something. He used to be curious about why the air in this place was so good, and why plants grew especially quickly here. At that time, he was young and didn't know what cultivation was. Naturally, he didn't know. Now, it was clear that there was a source of spiritual energy here. When Jin Qian pondered for a moment before slowly walking to the corner. He calmly stretched out a finger along the wall. He bent and tapped the wall with the knuckles of his fingers. His feet also used a special way to test the uniqueness of this place. He lowered his eyes, and his eyes were deep and calm. There was no sadness or joy on his extremely beautiful and extremely ugly face. He was like a feather immortal. Noble but distant. Finally, his fingertips trembled and he found it. When Jin Qian looked coldly at the wall under his fingertips. The mottled and faded wall looked hard, but when his fingertips used a special gesture to test it. He pressed on a soft source of heat. It was a special and beautiful touch. There was indeed something. When Jinqian's fingers grabbed something soft and warm and reached out from the soft depths of the wall, there was a small flower in the palm of his hand. It was purple and had many petals in the center. It was fluorescent and exceptionally beautiful. This was top-grade golden purple immortal tea. Although it was not mature, it contained an astonishing amount of spiritual energy. The little flower seemed to suddenly feel something and intimately wrapped around Wen Jinqian's finger. He knew that it was the spiritual energy that was suppressed in his body. It was attracting it. When Jinqian took the flower to the little fox, he planned to stuff it into her mouth for her to eat. This thing was very good. It could let her directly pass through the foundation establishment stage. He couldn't eat it because he was already facing the sore tribulation, and the spiritual energy in his body was already too abundant. Once he ate it, it would trigger the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and in more serious cases, it would directly trigger the thunder tribulation and bring forward the sore. She pinched the flower between her delicate fingertips and brought it to Wei Wei Bai's diamond-shaped lips. Just as she was about to stuff it in, suddenly, Wei Wei Bai seemed to smell something, and her nose twitched uncomfortably. Then she sneezed. The little flower fell off his fingertips. When Jinqian puffed up his cheeks helplessly and quickly bent down to get the flowers, suddenly, a cracking sound was heard. Wei Wei Bai's chair caved in. She slid down and crashed into him. When Jinqian's small body fell to the ground, his lips touched the flower. The flower also took advantage of the situation and rushed into his mouth, melting into his body. The tremendous surge of qi was like an explosion, causing him to curl up in severe pain. When Jinqian frowned and stretched out his fingertips, the spiritual energy that he had been suppressing leaked a little. He immediately extended his finger and gently drew out the spirit qi. Then, he sealed the spirit qi again. He couldn't let the spiritual energy erupt. Otherwise, all the living creatures around him would be reduced to ashes. Moreover, it would also stimulate the skill to mutate. Wei Wei Bai propped herself up from the ground. The quality of the chair was too lousy. She reached out to cover her head. Suddenly, she thought of something and looked down. She saw that one of Wen Jinqian's legs was pressed under her. The corners of her mouth twitched and she immediately got up. "Are you okay, Xiao Qian?" Chapter 2378. Little Qian, finally, when Jinqian got up from the ground, he staggered. Suddenly, he fell head first. Wei Wei Bai reached out and hugged him. His thin and small body was almost weightless. His deep and dark eyes trembled, and his eyelids finally drooped down unwillingly. There was too much spiritual energy. He automatically fell into a deep sleep to digest the spiritual energy. It would take about 2 hours. His lips were even paler. Before he fainted, he whispered, "Don't go out. Wait for me to wake up." After saying that, he tilted his head and fell asleep quietly. Wei Wei Bai hugged him and looked at him speechlessly. Without the system, she didn't know why Wen Jinqian had fallen to such a state. She put him on a broken bed board. Then, she supported her chin with her hands and squatted to observe him with her tail swaying. The cold and aloof celestial was too difficult to capture. The increase of 20 favorability points was so slow that it made people speechless. Maybe he really didn't like cute girls. She should pretend to be cold and aloof. The ice beauty made him want to conquer her. Or the gorgeous demoness who brought disaster to the country made him lose his sense of direction. Wei Wei Bai thought happily and chuckled wretchedly from time to time. Suddenly, she heard something. She leaned against the hole and pulled open the wall. The dim light gradually leaked in. The light fell on Wen Jinqian's face. The red pattern on half of his face was revealed. The cold red had a cruel and ferocious feeling. It was extremely evil. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows, clenched her teeth, and looked up calmly. Something was trying to open up the hole. Was it those monsters just now? After all, humans couldn't be that powerful. Wei Wei Bai gently stuffed Wen Jinqian into a darker corner and removed the cloth that covered the tree. It covered his body. She didn't know what happened to Wen Jinqian. However, something serious must have happened to make him unconscious. Before he woke up, she couldn't let him be killed. There was no system. She couldn't tell at all. Wen Jinqian's body was now attached to a body. It was a puppet possession, or his real age had regressed. Sometimes, just thinking about it made him feel like he had a hard life. She sold her body, her life, and her cuteness. In exchange, he only received 20 favorable impression points. With this kind of favorability, not to mention love, even friends would be plastic. She turned into a little fox and flew up. He had to lure those monsters away. She probably knew why this place was discovered. Because when he entered, there was a fresh smell coming from this place. It should be a land of spiritual energy or something. This kind of spiritual energy might frighten the monsters outside. But now, there was none. Wen Jinqian also fell into a deep sleep. Therefore, she guessed that Wen Jinqian had done something. As a result, the dark and enclosed basement was emitting an old stench. Her nose really couldn't stand it. It definitely wasn't because she couldn't stand the stench here. Only then did he go out to lure the enemy away. She was trying to save her target. After the little fox went up, it saw the hole expand. A human head poked out of the cave. It was a normal human face. It seemed that after those monsters turned into humans, their strength was also very great. Wei Wei Bai did not think too much and immediately extended her claws to scratch that person's face. That person's face was cut open. However, there was no trace of red. Instead, rotten white flesh appeared. Wei Wei Bai, she wanted to wash her claws. As expected, that person's face was in so much pain that he cried out and fell back. She quickly ran out. However, she saw a scene that shocked her speechless. Quick. Chapter 2379. There was more than one person outside. There were at least dozens of them. But those people still looked normal just now. Now, they had begun to rot, emitting a terrifying black aura and a stench. Suddenly, she felt that the smell in the basement was not bad at all. Compared to this place, it was simply heaven. When they saw the little fox appear, they immediately revealed ferocious expressions. It's a monster. I said that little bastard must be a monster. He finally revealed his true colors. Our town was originally very prosperous, but after he came, people died every day. The chickens I raised last night died. He must have bitten them to death. A rotting humanoid monster. They couldn't tell her from Wen Jinqian at all. They just followed their own obsession, fear, and twisted madness. Under the hint of the dream, they began to chase after Wei Wei Bai with all their might. Wei Wei Bai was so disgusted by the smell of these zombies that she couldn't live. She quickly rushed to the roof. Those zombies immediately stumbled and chased after her, leaving the cave entrance. Burn him to death. We have to let him die so that we can live a peaceful life. Those people kept cursing angrily. Some people's faces were so rotten that only bones were left. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were so hot that she wanted to go blind. What the hell was this place? Wen Jinqian looked like an immortal, and he was especially awesome. How could he be related to this place? She connected all the clues in her mind. This must be the place where Wen Jinqian lived during his childhood. And the child just now looked like Wen Jinqian during his childhood. For some reason, this place was suppressed by the Tianshu Hall. And Wen Jinqian's smell appeared at the entrance. She guessed that this place was suppressed by Wen Jinqian. But she couldn't guess why this group of people became like this. There were all kinds of strange things in the cultivation world. Now that she was trapped here with Wen Jinqian, he wasn't anxious at all when he saw old monster Wen. So he definitely knew how to leave this place. Maybe he was waiting for time or something. So Wei Wei Bai decided to delay the time. As long as old monster Wen didn't run, she was not anxious. At the very least, her family would be back in 3 days. With Tongzi in hand, she had nothing to be afraid of. Tongzi, a good helper for strategy, a good friend for quick transmigration, cheap, easy to worry about and handsome. She suddenly felt that he was gone. Life was so hard. Just as Wei Wei Bai sighed, a net fell from the sky. Damn, zombies actually know how to use tools to hunt. She was dragged down by the net, and her small body fell heavily to the ground. Her hair rubbed against his, and the pain made her hair stand on end. Those people with rotting faces suddenly rushed over and hurriedly dragged her away. Wei Wei Bai felt as if she had been thrown into a washing machine. Turning left and right, she felt dizzy and disoriented. Under the dark sky, countless rotting people rushed out and surrounded Wei Wei Bai. Burn him. Burn this monster. As long as we kill him, we will be free. Countless venomous voices surged toward the little fox like a tide. Wei Wei Bai said that her ears were itchy and she wanted to scratch them. No matter how vicious his words were, she didn't feel anything. More importantly, she was going to become a fox barbecued meat. The stench of rotting corpses filled this strange and twisted place. The soldiers sitting at the city gate also ran over while cursing, holding rusty knives. Bad luck, it's that damn unlucky little monster again. His mother is not a good thing, no wonder she gave birth to a little monster. / Chapter 2380. Wei Wei Bai took a closer look and wanted to rub her eyes. That soldier had turned into a skeleton and was walking over shakily. He even lost a rib by accident. Wei Wei Bai, the impact of this scene was a little hard to swallow. The city gate was filled with bustling people. Those people with broken hands and feet struggled to carry a pile of rotten firewood. The darkness in the sky was more intense and kept rolling. Even the light of lightning could be faintly seen. But there was no sound. There was only endless viciousness, abuse, and cruelty in this place. Wei Wei Bai looked at them coldly and thought about how to escape. She stretched out her little claws and silently ground them on the ground. The sharper they were, the more they would hurt later. The system came back. It saw its host's ears drooping pitifully as she was bound by the net. Then her eyes were wet and sorrowful. Her little claws weakly ground the ground. She seemed to be bullied badly. System, the effect of the cute selling device was too scary. It actually fell for it. It actually thought that its host was the most pitiful and the most adorable in the world. It quickly rubbed its eyes and woke up. Sure enough, it saw its host's cold and vicious face. It didn't know what terrible and vicious plan was in her heart. Yes, this was its host. His eyes finally returned to normal. Wei Wei Bai finished grinding her claws and eerily blew on the tips of her claws. Then, just as she was about to gather strength and tear the net, she heard the system's voice. I watched the rewind video. This is the male lead's dream world. Wei Wei Bai immediately revealed a bright fox smile. Her lovely oval eyes were curved and delicate. Unusually cute. Everything I miss you so much. System that thought that the host was very annoying but still thought that she was cute. The longer the cute selling device was used, the better the effect. But this cute selling device was thrown into the trash can by him. Because it was flawed. The better the effect, the stupider the brain. Please don't let the host know. She would beat him to death. Wei Wei Bai finally reacted and asked the key question, what do you mean by dream return? The system heaved a sigh of relief. The host still had some intelligence left. It was worth celebrating. Then, in one breath, he told her about the male lead's tragic childhood. When Jinqian's mother seemed to have been raped by some unknown creature. Then she gave birth to Wen Jinqian. In this place, gossip was a fearful thing. Everyone looked down on the mother and son. They had been bullying and suppressing them. During Wen Jinqian's childhood, he relied on his mother to beg for money. However, his mother had been repressed for a long time and had gone crazy. Every time she acted up, she would torture Wen Jinqian to death. Many times, Wen Jinqian had died at the hands of his mother. Later, when his mother went out to beg, she was beaten to death because she dirted the shoes of the tavern's manager. The head shopkeeper threw a few copper coins and 2 steamed buns to Wen Jinqian as compensation. Wen Jinqian silently took the copper coins, then picked up the steamed bun and stuffed it into his mouth. But his eyes were terrifyingly red. His ferocious killing intent was vividly displayed in the way he ate the steamed bun. Now, everyone could see how terrifying this child was. Sure enough, in less than half a month, the tavern's manager died. It was as if a beast had dug out his heart and cut open his stomach. It was extremely miserable. All of a sudden, the entire town looked at Wen Jinqian in a bad light. But he was so small, and they felt that he couldn't have that much strength. While they were still in doubt, Wen Jinqian suddenly erupted with a strange power. Chapter 2381. He could move objects through space, predict life and death, and control animals. Wasn't this a monster? And as he grew older, red lines appeared on the left side of Wen Jinqian's face. Monster. Everyone's consensus. He was definitely the child of a demon, a monster who wanted to kill them. So everyone bullied and humiliated him even more. They wanted him dead. And more people died here. They were all disemboweled. Finally, one day, the resentment of this group of people erupted. They tied Wen Jinqian to a rack and burned him to death. The flames devoured his young body. But at the last moment, he burst out the hidden spiritual energy in his body. He escaped from the flames. The huge spiritual energy injured and killed some people. The red lines were because he had the rarest and most powerful wood-type celestial spirit root in the cultivation world. A unique talent in 10,000 years. When he didn't know how to cultivate, the overly pure spiritual energy in his body couldn't be hidden, so it climbed to the surface of his skin. The red lines finally condensed into the lotus mark between his eyebrows. It became his sea of consciousness. It hid an inexhaustible supply of spiritual energy. From then on, the most talented, youngest, and most unattainable cultivator in the cultivation world appeared. And because of the influence of his pure wood-type celestial spirit root, he cultivated the heartless and heartless Great Tao. It was twice the result with half the effort. He would almost never become a demon. The only time he became a demon was more than 600 years ago. When Jinqian, who had cultivated for almost 70 years, was already considered the most stunning pearl in the cultivation world. After becoming a demon, he returned here. He turned this place into what it was today. Many people who bullied him back then were actually old or dead. When Jinqian, who was possessed, was extremely paranoid. He drew on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and borrowed the endless wood-type vitality. He turned all the people who bullied him in his memory from old to young. He resurrected the dead. Then, he started endless hellish torture. He made the people here suffer forever, plunging them into the pain of despair. It was simply tragic and unheard of. Then, after being trapped here for more than 600 years, he sensed that she had fallen here and finally came back to take a look. He casually used dream reincarnation to drag everyone back to 600 years ago. Once dream return was fully activated, all the souls here would be destroyed by Wen Jinqian. Their souls were scattered, never to be reincarnated. And there was a reason why she fell here. The threads of love on her body were connected to him, so Tianshu Hall misunderstood that she was Wen Jinqian's woman. She was then placed in the deeper levels of the hall. Actually, this was not the second level. This was the 18th floor. The 18 levels of hell. The first level was heaven, and the further one went, the more terrifying it was. Wei Wei Bai thought that Wen Jinqian was not being nice. He looked righteous and gentle. Although he was a little cold, he should have a good heart. In the end, he turned out to be a lunatic. She silently wiped away her cold sweat. It seemed that old Wen was not a turtle at all. It was old venomous snake Wen. Normally, he would be hidden, but once he was provoked, he would bite him to death. The net was suddenly hoisted up and tied to the rack. Wei Wei Bai stared at him with her big round eyes. She was silent for a moment. Then she asked, "Can I go out if I burn for Wen Jinqian?" Dream return was actually an illusion. She would be burned to death here. She would not really die. The system flipped through the information and nodded. You have Wen Jinqian's smell on you. You can be Wen Jinqian's substitute. By Wei Wei, you smell like an old viper. At https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. The system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 2382. Why did this sound so weird? Because she knew she would not die. She could even help Wen Jinqian. Bai Weiwei also calmly stayed in the net, waiting to be burned. She looked at the rotten people moving the firewood and said coldly, "Hey, what a waste of effort. I can't be burned to death." The system was speechless. Damn, the after effects are serious. The host's IQ is shrinking. When the host wakes up, she will know she was so stupid. She will definitely, strangle him. But hey, if he doesn't appear, she won't be able to strangle him, haha. The firewood was quickly lit. The guy who started the fire even lost a few finger bones. The system and Wei Wei Bai were speechless. This scene made them lose their appetite. The flames burned fiercely. Wei Wei Bai's fox fur crackled with the smell of caramel. She finally realized one thing. It hurts a little. The system said, yes, the pain here is magnified 1-to-1, so you can experience a realistic simulation without any blind spots. Wei Wei Bai, who was slowly becoming stupid, was speechless. That's right, Wen Jinqian used this place to torture people. It was only 1-to-1. It was not 1-to-100, but the old snake was kind and soft-hearted. But it hurts so much. The system reluctantly turned on the minimum life guarantee. Isolating the pain, it'll be hard for the host to die today. Wei Wei Bai came back to life. She returned to her arrogant look. Humph, what a waste of effort. It doesn't hurt at all. Why do I suddenly feel so powerful? System, why do I suddenly feel like the host is stupid again? This after effect. He wondered how he could increase her affinity in the future. Isn't the most awesome thing about the host that she's thick-skinned, vicious, and calm? The only thing that's left is thick-skinned. In the dark basement, a ray of light shone on the bedboard. When Jinqian's muscles twitched, he opened his eyes and finally got rid of the problem of excessive spiritual energy. He almost attracted the immortal tribulation Xian Thunder. I should solve the dream quickly. I'll think about it after I get out. When Jinqian's deep eyes quickly swept across the basement. The hole had become bigger, and the ground was in a mess. Also, the little fox was gone. He suddenly realized something and fiercely bit his lip. Just now, when the spiritual aura leaked out, he was shocked. Something strange had happened here. He realized that he had been pushed into the darkest corner. The thick cloth covered his small body. Was she going to hide him while she ran out to lure the monsters away? This place was not dangerous for him. Therefore, he had always been very leisurely. But what about the little fox? She didn't know that this was an illusion. How much courage did she need to hide him and run away by herself? When Jinqian slowly got up, the red lines on the left side of his face became even fewer. A cinnabar mole appeared between his eyebrows. His childish eyes were cold and unsullied, yet abnormally cold. The spiritual energy that had been suppressed with great difficulty began to move again. When Jinqian knew his current situation, he must continue to meditate and cultivate in seclusion. The little fox let her be. After all, this was his illusion. If he didn't want her to die, she wouldn't die no matter what kind of torture she was subjected to. But, it would hurt. It hurt, it hurt, it hurt. When Jinqian slowly closed his eyes and sat cross-legged, his fingers forming seals, he continued to suppress his spiritual energy. His emotions couldn't fluctuate. He couldn't be affected by others. When Jinqian silently lowered his eyes for a long time. Finally, he slowly opened his eyes and helplessly let out a sigh. Quick. Chapter 2383. He got out of bed and clumsily climbed up and out of the basement. Then, without caring about anything else, he ran forward with all his might. Where would she be? The thick black aura in the sky seemed to be affected by his emotions and began to stir. The huge vortex was like a terrifying eye. It was monitoring this place. When Jinqian's left face was hot, and his spiritual aura was boiling. Using the surveillance from above, he saw a fire at the city gate. These lost souls, unless they caught him. Otherwise, they wouldn't make a fire. When Jinqian's pupils constricted, he finally thought that Wei Wei Bai could fall here. It was because of the threads of love in her body. Their souls were involved with each other. Even if this kind of involvement was relatively shallow. But her body was still filled with his aura, so she also obtained the recognition of the Dubhe Hall and was pulled here. So the souls bound here treated the little fox as him. When Jinqian's small body bypassed countless alleys and took a shortcut to the city gate. His body was still that of a child when he had no strength. So his physical strength would be exhausted, his forehead would sweat, and his throat would be extremely dry because of the lack of water. He hadn't felt this way for a long time. This kind of pain and powerlessness. He staggered through an alley and finally saw the city gate. A huge bonfire appeared. A burning smell came. He supported his fingers on the wall and looked intently. He saw a scene that made his heart tremble. A small white fox was tied to a wooden frame by chains and broken nets. The flames burned all the fur on her body. She was already confused by the heat. Her claws were lying on the chains, so hot that the palms of her claws were charred. Her beautiful light-colored pupils had long lost their usual brightness. The pain of despair had caused her dark eyes to lose focus. The feeling of being burned by the flames was extremely painful. This pain was deeply rooted in her bones. Although Wen Jinqian was not afraid of high temperatures, when his small body approached the flames, he could still remember the intense pain of the flames entering his flesh and bones more than 700 years ago. That was a kind of pain that he would not hesitate to destroy the world to break free. And around the flames were a vicious crowd of people. It's good that she's dead. My chickens won't die in the future. This kind of god of plague should be burned to death. Ha ha ha, we should celebrate and have a few drinks today. Everything was familiar, but it was detestable. He reappeared just like that. When Jinqian walked out from the corner, step by step, his abyss-like eyes stared coldly at them. They were clearly a group of earthbound spirits that could no longer become his heart demon. This kind of scene should not be able to shake his mellow heart. However, at this moment, the spirit chi in his body began to surge violently. The red lines on the left side of his face were also shrinking and fading. A lotus flower was faintly visible between his eyebrows. The little fox seemed to have sensed something. Her eyelashes trembled as she weakly looked up at him. Then, she smiled weakly and said softly, "Pinky promise for 100 years." His voice was so soft that it couldn't be heard. If it weren't for the fact that everything here couldn't escape Wen Jinqian's surveillance. He didn't even know that she was looking up at him. For some reason, the corners of his eyes suddenly became moist. He was just a little beggar that they had met by chance. How stupid is he? That was why she was willing to do this for him. It wasn't worth it. None of this was worth it. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2384. The spiritual energy exploded, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth surged. A bolt of lightning flashed in the sky. The first tribulation of the immortal cultivation tribulation. The mortal annihilation fate was about to arrive. When Jinqian rushed into the crowd, and those rotten bodies screamed. Is it that little monster? Why are there two little monsters? No matter how many there are, burn them to death. Burn to death. Burn to death. When Jinqian's ears were filled with these two words. But in his eyes, there was only Wei Wei Bai in the flames, who had been burned to the point of being seriously injured. Spiritual energy overflowed from his sea of consciousness, and the lotus seal reappeared. He rushed into the flames without hesitation, but the flames were torn apart by the spiritual energy, and he couldn't get close at all. The small child's body began to grow up. The child's immaturity began to mature. The child's face became delicate and handsome. His hands and feet also became longer, and his fingers were slender and fair. His round eyes became slightly narrow and cold like a deep pool. The chains shattered under the spiritual energy, and the little fox, who had been burned to a black color, fell heavily. When Jinqian, who had turned back into a youth, reached out to catch her, but he saw that her flesh had been turned over, revealing the terrible burn wounds under her skin. His heart tightened. The fingertips that held her small body began to tremble. The little fox only had one last breath left. She weakly held her eyelids and stared at him blankly for a while before slowly revealing a cute and brilliant smile. "Master, you came to save me," when Jinqian's eyes were wet. Even if it had nothing to do with love, he felt heartache for this trust and protection. He stretched out his slender fingers and gently landed on her wound. "It's okay, I'm here." The little fox's burned little claws struggled to rest on his arm. My friend, little Chien. Slowly, her words. They weakened. Her wounds were soothed by his spiritual energy, and she finally couldn't hold on any longer and lay softly on his chest. On the verge of death, this was her current state. This was a dream. Once the dream was broken, she would be fine. But she didn't know. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 30. When Jinqian slowly closed his eyes and floated in the air, looking down at the souls that were only bones. They were still clamoring. The flames were also burning furiously. And the spiritual chi of heaven and earth that he attracted finally attracted his immortal cultivation tribulation. Deafening thunder rumbled. Countless bolts of lightning danced in the dark sky like swimming dragons. Huge electric tentacles illuminated the area as if it was daytime. The immortal tribulation had a total of 9 lightning tribulations. And now, it was the first one. A mortal's immortal cultivation was already going against the will of the heavens. If they wanted to cross the dragon gate, they could only endure the punishment of the heavenly Tao. The first punishment was to extinguish all ties with the mortal world. His worldly ties were where his emotional ties lay. She was also the one who destroyed all the emotional connections he had in this world, including his enemies. As expected, the huge lightning bolt struck this place. The howling spirits were all reduced to ashes. Dream Return was destroyed by the immense power of the heavenly Tao. The little fox's fur shone again, but when Jinqian's gaze was even colder. He had no intention of relaxing. He had already predicted that this day would come, so the Heavenly Gate sect was protected by him with a formation to block the thunder tribulation. Only those who had a deep relationship with him would suffer such a calamity. His grand disciple would not be chosen by the thunder tribulation. His disciples had already taken out a jade pendant to block the lightning tribulation. As long as the first lightning tribulation was over, they would be fine in the future. There was only one. He had forgotten to make a jade pendant for her. When Jinqian lowered his eyes, and his snow-white fingertips gently landed on her forehead, a pure spiritual aura wrapped around her body. A huge bolt of lightning suddenly exploded from the sky. In the white lightning. When Jinqian's features were exquisite, and the lotus mark on his forehead deepened. His voice was soft and calm. It's fine. Accompany me through the thunder tribulation. He made it sound as if he was carrying her on an outing. Quick to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Quick to read on. Calm, quick, comma. Chapter 2385. Xian Yi and Su San, who were looking for their junior sister, had arrived at the 3rd floor of the Imperial Pivot Hole. They brought the little fox out. Then they lost her. They couldn't explain it when they returned. Su San's face was so cold that his killing intent was boiling. When they broke through the 2nd floor, it was Su San who broke through the array with his sword. This caused many sects on the 1st floor to hurriedly stop him. Because if he did that, he would trigger an unknown trap. This caused the people on the 1st floor to be unsafe. Who cares if you die? Su San dealt with all of them with his sword. Xian Yi helplessly followed behind him to clean up the mess. I thought you hated junior sister very much. Xian Yi forced a smile and said. Su San mocked, I do hate her, but I have to bring back someone who was lost in my hands. He just didn't expect that the 2nd floor of the Imperial Pivot Hall would be so strange and dark. It wasn't easy to get to the 3rd floor. But he found that the 3rd floor was even more complicated and strange. And the little fox still didn't see it. Could it be that she fell somewhere and was killed by the traps in the Imperial Pivot Hole? Not to mention Xian Yi's worry, even Su San's face was solemn. To put it bluntly, the little fox didn't do anything wrong. The red string wasn't tied by the little fox and she was taken to the Heavenly Gate sect. Revered Master Shun didn't kill her and directly took her as his disciple. Everyone knew what he meant. This showed that the love string couldn't affect Master. Master also directly used the relationship between Master and disciple to warn the little fox. Suddenly, the two frowned. The jade pendant flashed with the color of lightning. This was blocking the lightning tribulation. Master was going through the immortal tribulation. How could it be so sudden? The love string would affect one's mind and cause the birth of an inner demon. So it was impossible to suddenly go through the tribulation for no reason. After all, it was a taboo to go through the tribulation. The two of them looked at each other and frowned at the same time. Master is here. The lightning tribulation was so close to them. Master should be in the Imperial Pivot Hall, but why was he here? The first heaven-shaking immortal tribulation. It smashed into the Imperial Pivot Hall. The Imperial Pivot Hall began to crumble. The Imperial Pivot Hall couldn't withstand such a powerful lightning strike. Everyone who was in the middle of it fled. Those who couldn't escape in time were reduced to ashes. Xian Yi and Su San appeared in midair. They watched as the huge palace appeared from the black hole, shattered and scattered. In the end, they turned into countless white rays of light. White dust filled the sky. All of them had the power to destroy the world. The rest of the disciples of the Heavenly Gate sect also rushed over using various immortal artifacts. The Thunder Tribulation had caused a sensation in the entire cultivation world. No one knew why it happened so suddenly. Why did the ancestor of the Heavenly Gate sect, who had always been as steady as Mount Tai, trigger the Thunder Tribulation for no reason? Cultivators at Wen Jinqian's level. It could suppress the arrival of the lightning tribulation. It would not have attracted such a terrifying heavenly punishment all of a sudden. The first lightning tribulation descended, and a terrifyingly large lightning pillar blasted into the lowest level of the hall. The radiance of this lightning tribulation flickered for an entire hour. Powerful immortal cultivators and the ancestors of various sects appeared. As for the younger generation, they all fled. After all, there were 8 more paths after the first one. Those who were slightly weaker would be able to endure it. As for the other old monsters, they were indeed here to watch the epiphany of the immortal tribulation. It had been too long since anyone had been able to trigger the immortal tribulation. This was the most valuable experience. Finally, the first lightning tribulation dissipated. The fragrance of lotus flowers came in bursts, and countless lotus phantoms fell from the white light. Download Transmigration System, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m, Sashu. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 2386. This was formed by the condensation of power. It was pure and sharp. The lightning tribulation also suddenly disappeared, and the other 8 lightning tribulations quieted down. This was the person transcending the tribulation. He restrained his spiritual energy and covered up his aura. The remaining 8 lightning strikes were temporarily suppressed, waiting for the person transcending the tribulation to reveal himself again before continuing the heavenly punishment. It seemed that Wen Jinqian didn't want to become an immortal yet. Amidst the countless rays of white light, a faintly discernible slender figure suddenly walked over on a lotus flower. His black hair was like cold satin in the night, hanging behind him. The white robe was not damaged by the lightning tribulation at all, and the golden edges were still bright and new. He held a beautiful little white fox in his hand and slowly walked out of the white lotus. The lotus mark between his eyebrows faintly glowed with golden light. He was like a god, like an immortal. Xian Yi took a look and saw that the person in his master's arms was actually his little junior sister. Even Su San raised his eyebrows in surprise. The rest of the people whispered in confusion. After all, the person transcending the tribulation dared to hold a living thing. Wasn't this even more difficult? Could it be that the fox had some great magical power? Could it help Wen Jinqian? But the fox looked like she only had a few hundred years of cultivation. At the stage of gaining intelligence, she was just a child who had just taken human form. How could she have any ability? Suddenly, there was another sound of thunder in the clouds. Everyone frowned. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was affected again. But this time, wasn't it too small? If the sky was falling and the earth was cracking just now. Now, it was just a breeze, not worth mentioning. The weaker ones had already run away. Those who stayed were all famous big shots. They looked up. The lightning tribulation of the Foundation establishment stage, it was simply trash. Xian Yi said indifferently, "Little junior sisters?" The rest of the brothers nodded. The little fox would be at the Foundation establishment stage soon, and they were afraid that her foundation would be unstable. They even prepared 2 bottles of Foundation establishment pills. Just when everyone thought that Wen Jinqian would put down the fox and let her transcend the tribulation by herself. The youth in the white robe stood on the lotus. His eyelashes, which had been turned light by the white light, gently drooped down, and his eyes were gentle and calm. A small lightning bolt landed on the ground, directly striking at the little fox's head. However, in the next moment, when Jinqian raised his hand and the lightning tribulation fell directly into his hand. The curling electric light wanted to escape. But in the blink of an eye, it was caught by his sleeve and scattered. The lightning tribulation of the Foundation establishment stage was over. Spiritual energy surged into Wei Wei Bai's body and the little white fox began to grow bigger. Her fox fur was gone, revealing her fair arms and beautiful ankles. A delicate and cute face appeared. She turned into a human and quietly fell asleep in the boy's arms. It was peaceful and quiet. The Foundation establishment stage lightning tribulation that was fatal to all newcomers. Just like that, it was gone. All the big shots present were dumbfounded. When Jinqian actually helped others transcend the tribulation. Or was it the lightning tribulation of a mere Foundation establishment cultivator? That was crazy. Everyone knew that when Jinqian was cold and heartless. Who could enter his eyes? When Jinqian walked in front of Xian Yi and glanced at Su San. The 2 brothers lowered their heads in shame. When Jinqian's voice was extremely calm. Go back to the sect to receive your punishment. The 2 brothers immediately lowered their heads. Yes, master. Several red-crowned cranes flew over. When Jinqian stepped on them and left with Wei Wei Bai. The big shots looked at each other blankly. They looked at the immortal tribulation and the lowest level of the Foundation establishment tribulation. Chapter 2387. The difference was so big that it made people speechless. Finally, someone asked carefully, "Is this ancestor Wen's Tao companion?" Xian Yi was silent for a while before saying, "No, she's his disciple, our little junior sister." Although they hadn't done the master-disciple ceremony yet. But Master had personally said that he would accept her, so that was it. Another person asked, "Your sect is so good to your disciple?" Even the Foundation establishment tribulation was helped by the ancestor. "Do you think I can join the Heavenly Gate sect? I'm in the spirit severing stage and will soon undergo the unification tribulation." So this person, was she trying to get Wen Jinqian to help her pass the unification tribulation? The group of Heavenly Gate sect disciples fell silent. Their master, who was struck by lightning, would not shed a single drop of crocodile tears. let alone think that anyone could get him to help them pass the tribulation. As for their little junior sister, why did it feel like Master was so biased? Wei Wei Bai jumped up. Where's Wen Jinqian? Has his dream been broken? System, the host was too dedicated. When she opened her eyes, she was working. Then the system briefly told her what happened after she fell asleep. It emphasized that the favorability was 30. Wei Wei Bai nodded in relief. I didn't risk my life in vain to be burned to death. It's not easy to have a very good favorability. After all, old Monster Wen's heart was harder than steel. It would take a lot of effort to pry it open. System, you just slept. You didn't even feel the slightest bit of pain. Wei Wei Bai looked around. Hazy light and shadow shone through the walls of the room. Beautiful light, red and white, intertwined. The door of the room was very big and open. She could see the sparkling shadows outside, and all kinds of lotus flowers were blooming. Wei Wei Bai got off the bed and found the lotus petals covering her body. She walked out of the door and found a huge space. The lotus field was boundless. Not far away, she could see another open door. Inside, there were all kinds of bookshelves that were so tall that she couldn't see the top. There were all kinds of glowing scrolls. Another door was filled with all kinds of treasures. The system told her that this was Wen Jinqian's lotus world. It had always been placed in the depths of the pool. It was also where Wen Jinqian meditated in seclusion. Wei Wei Bai thought that he was hiding in the flower bud and that there was only a small space. The grandeur and magic of the cultivation world had once again broadened her horizons. Wei Wei Bai suddenly stopped and saw Wen Jinqian sitting on the futon. The lotus intimately leaned against his body. There was no expression on his snow-white face. His long and narrow eyelashes were tightly shut, casting a clean silhouette under his eyelids. The young man's face was exceptionally beautiful. His beautiful thin red lips were even more eye-catching than the red lotus beside him. Holy and aloof, that was everyone's first impression of him. Wei Wei Bai directly sat on the lotus bushes, and several lotus flowers avoided her in disdain. She didn't care. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at Wen Jinqian with a smile. Wen Jinqian was incomparably indifferent and emotionless. He sensed her arrival. However, he had a lot of experience in meditation. Even if the heavens fell and the earth cracked, he would still be able to meditate. When it was time to sit, he could still remain indifferent. Wei Wei Bai saw that he still had his eyes closed and didn't move at all. She pinched a petal. The lotus sensed that she was full of Wen Jinqian's scent and could only tremble and be bullied by her. Wei Wei Bai pinched the petal and gently scratched the back of his hand. The young man's eyelashes didn't even tremble. He was still as indifferent as before. The lotus petal, however, was a little bit. It was like a provocation, but also like some kind of intimate game that one couldn't refuse. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 2388. Wei Wei Bai had already retreated. It was as if she did not sneak attack him just now. She rested her chin on her hands, her face flushed. She giggled and said, "Master, you're awake." Wen Jinqian just stared at her with a deep gaze. Bai Weiwei didn't care about his cold eyes that could scare people to death. Instead, she said happily, "I told you Master would come and save me." "Oh right, have you seen my friend?" Wen Jinqian was silent for a long time, then said indifferently, "Yes, I let him go down the mountain and gave him money to find a good family to settle him down." Sure enough, Bai Weiwei smiled even more happily. "Then I can go down the mountain and play with him in the future." Wen Jinqian looked at her coldly, confirming that she was indeed unrepentant. Thinking of this, When Jinqian's voice became colder. You can't go down the mountain for a while. You left the sect without permission and got others into trouble. I'll punish you by confinement. Under Wei Wei Bai's surprised gaze. He waved his finger. You can't leave the sect for 100 years. Wei Wei Bai was immediately thrown out of the lotus bud by a strong and gentle force. She was thrown out of the pond and rolled a few times before landing on a red-crowned crane that opened its wings to catch her. Wei Wei Bai immediately shouted, Master, 100 years is too long. 100 years is my friend more than 100 years old. He's too old. Too old. When Jinqian flicked his finger, and she was once again thrown out of the hall by a soft wind. Wei Wei Bai helplessly touched her head. This old demon was not easy to flirt with. She said to the system, he's like a 10,000-year-old latrine stone, smelly and hard. System. You just kissed him. Wei Wei Bai, a latrine stone, she kissed him. She suddenly felt that the kiss was very tasty. When Jinqian was sure that the little fox had skipped away again. She was so heartless. She did not even know when she would die. A strange frown appeared on Wen Jinqian's cold and calm brows. He still paid too much attention to her. He gathered his thoughts. He closed his eyes again. In his current state, he could trigger the remaining 8 heavenly tribulations at any time. Therefore, it would be best for him to remain in seclusion. The youth sat down and meditated. He closed his eyes in silence for a long time. He suddenly stretched out his finger and placed it on his lips. This action caused him to open his eyes again. The color of the lotus seal was slightly more beautiful. After a long time, he closed his eyes again. However, the color of the lotus seal did not fade in the slightest. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 35. Wei Wei Bai, who was eating in the cafeteria, pricked up her ears and frowned. Why did her favorability increase? Or is it because old Monster Wen's reflexes are too fast? Only then did he realize that she was flirting with him. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while and felt that her brain was not working well. She knocked on her forehead. Then, he continued to eat. Was it because the food was not good or the weather was not good? Why was she thinking about that big rock? When Jinqian went into seclusion again. Wei Wei Bai, conquering the ginseng was too difficult. It was a target that would go into seclusion at the drop of a hat. How could it be worthy of her, who worked so hard to conquer it? Chapter 2389. Wei Wei Bai waited for about half a month. During this time, she stole chickens and beat dogs. She acted like an unfilial disciple who had insulted her master. In the end, old Monster Wen did not come. A bunch of senior martial brothers would surround her at every turn. Junior sister, are you going to the cafeteria to plant cockroaches or burn books in the library today? I'll go with you, lest you get eaten by the pot in the library or the cafeteria, ha ha ha. Why don't I accompany you to the alchemy room today and teach you how to blow up the alchemy furnace? Both the library and the canteen had restrictions. Wei Wei Bai burned the library and was chased by the books. When she put cockroaches in the cafeteria pot, the pot opened its big mouth and almost stewed her. Every day, he would watch the little fox cause chaos in the cold Heavenly Gate sect. This was already one of the most enjoyable viewing events for the people here. Wei Wei Bai cupped her face and looked coldly at this group of childish senior brothers. However, in the eyes of others, she was still teary-eyed, because she was able to retract her ears and tail when she was in the Foundation establishment realm. But it didn't diminish her cuteness at all. Fluffy silver hair, light-colored eyes, and a small face. Even if she was angry, she was still like a kitten. Other foxes had their own coquettish and flirtatious temperaments. In the end, when it came to Wei Wei Bai, everyone suspected that they had picked up the wrong person from the fox's nest. Why did it feel like she was more like a cat or a dog? No matter how he looked at it, he was very likable. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "This bunch of idiots, ha ha ha." The system looked at the host with pity. Today was yet another day where the host's intelligence was lowered. Finally, Wei Wei Bai remembered that she had to attract old Monster Wen's attention. The system thought that the host had regained his intelligence. He immediately asked her about her plan. Wei Wei Bai said, "I can put laxatives in his lotus pond." Wei Wei Bai said, "Or we can force him to come out by pouring more products from the latrine pit." Although the host's IQ was still satisfactory. However, he had a vicious heart and a strange way of bullying others. There were still many of them. This was a very interesting conversation. He didn't even want to eat lunch, so he could only embroider more flowers to quench his hunger. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai calmly went to the latrine pit to observe the environment. After all, there were new disciples every year. There were also some cultivators who were above the foundation establishment stage but still had a craving for good food. Moreover, the latrine pit was filled with men. Because in the Heavenly Gates sect, apart from her, there was no other female cultivator. As a result, all the living arrangements were for men. Many of the young disciples walked out of the latrine pit while putting on their pants. She was almost scared back into the toilet by Wei Wei Bai. She stared at the people in the latrine with a strange expression. The system finally could not help but remind its mentally challenged host. "What are you doing here?" Even with all kinds of settings, the latrine pit was very clean and odorless. But, no matter how clean the word latrine pit was, it was still a latrine pit. The host said faintly, "I want to see if there are many people in the latrine pit." Sixth senior brother gave me a storage bag. I heard that it can store 100 square meters of items. I plan to fill it with the products here and pour them into old Monster Wen's lotus pond. System, does your sixth senior brother know that the bag he gave is used to store these things? Host, I heard that the bag has a self-plot function. After pouring, it can continue to be used. The system held its head in despair. It could still be used. Host, it's okay. I'll just return it to senior brother after using it. Don't waste it. Let them use it. System, no matter how low the IQ of the host was, she was still vicious. After 3 days of observation, it was confirmed that the storage was enough. Wei Wei Bai stuffed the storage bag into her sleeve and waited for the latrine pit at night. But she did not know that her strange reputation had spread. A perverted female fox who peeped at the young men in the men's latrine every day. A perverted female fox who clung to the latrine pit door and openly watched the young men in the latrine, making people so frightened that they could not sleep at night. A perverted female fox who wanted to do XXXXX things to hundreds of young men in the latrine. Then, when she arrived near the latrine, she saw a young man who was as noble and clean as an immortal standing there quietly. His lotus seal was still sacred and beautiful. His eyes were slightly tilted, and his gaze was deep and cold. Wei Wei Bai, old freak one, knew her purpose and came to the latrine to block her in advance. In the end, she heard his calm and elegant voice, which was like a cold spring, with a hint of depression that was hard to explain. "You. Wei Wei Bai." Chapter 2390. Under the cold moonlight, the scenery of the toilet was beautiful. An aloof immortal cultivator and a confused little fox. Wei Wei Bai reacted half a beat later. She immediately stopped breathing and her face turned red. Her eyes were moist and her lips were extremely red. The cute little fox had a few more traces of charm at this moment. It was more seductive than the red lotus. Then Wei Wei Bai pounced directly. Master, I'm so hot. Old Monster One wouldn't ask her for no reason. It must be that she was in heat, so he came to ask. Although she didn't feel anything at all. But it didn't matter. She could pretend. However, just as she pounced, when she was less than 10 centimeters away from the document, a slender and perfect finger pressed against her forehead. She immediately stopped moving and stood there in a daze, looking at Wen Jinqian in a daze. Wen Jinqian's eyelashes didn't even blink. His cold black eyes were deeper than the deepest night sky. Since there is no problem in this area, why do you harass the disciples of the sect every day? Wei Wei Bai, when did she harass the disciples of the sect? His fingertips were against her forehead. Under his fingertips were her ignorant eyes. As if she didn't know what she had done, she was still so innocent and pitiful. When Jinqian's indifferent eyes had a trace of strange fluctuations. He pursed his thin lips and remained silent as if he was enduring. Wei Wei Bai tried to move her hand. She could move. She immediately hugged his outstretched arm with both hands. Then her voice dragged out and was extremely sweet. Master, I'm really, when Jinqian interrupted rudely, you're not. Wei Wei Bai looked confused. How do you know? Her acting skills had regressed. When Jinqian looked at her face that was as red as rouge and her big eyes that were filled with longing. If it weren't for the fact that his body didn't feel any heat, he would also be deceived by her. The fox's nature of deception was too terrifying. No wonder there were so many demonesses that could bring disaster to the country. The fox clan was originally an existence that charmed all living beings. He shouldn't have been fooled by her little tricks. However, the plants here would do their job faithfully and report everything that happened to her to him. She ate a few meals today and spoke a few words to a few people. Or like something. What did he hate? What little animal was he bullying again? Admit it. When Jinqian's eyes were sharp and cold. It was because he had the intention that these plants would monitor her like this. Suddenly, he released his fingers and turned around to leave. In the future, don't come here to harass your juniors. She was his disciple. His seniority was extremely high. Other than a few senior brothers, everyone would greet him as martial uncle or martial granduncle. How could such a senior be so carefree? How could that be? When Jinqian clenched his fists and was about to disappear. A pair of hands had already wrapped around his waist, and an itchy feeling came from his back. Behind him, the little fox had already said sweetly, Master, I'm very obedient. How could I possibly harass others? Wasn't he lying through his teeth? Wasn't the thing she had done these past few days enough to cause chaos? He opened his mouth to condemn her. Her voice behind him had already softened, and her soft and shy words were almost inaudible. If it wasn't to see you, when Jinqian pursed his lips, and all the unspoken words disappeared. He didn't force himself to disappear. If he didn't agree, the little fox wouldn't even be able to hug him. Chapter 2391. When Jinqian carried Wei Wei Bai on his back. The shadows of the two of them were exceptionally clear under the moonlight. System, then he looked at the toilet not far away. Don't you feel uncomfortable standing here? It was one thing for the host's IQ to be eaten. But why was the male lead also cute? Of course, the system didn't hesitate for long. When Jinqian also noticed that the location was not right, and if someone woke up at night or something, it was not appropriate to see them standing here. He let out a faint sigh of relief. He always felt that when he met her, everything would not go smoothly. He cast a spell, grabbed her waist, and went up the highest mountain of Heaven Sect. The moon was clear, and the stars were like water. The mountain peak was high into the sky. Clouds and mist lingered. He let go of her and stood at the corner of the cliff. The young man's white robe fluttered in the wind. His thin lips were soft, but his words were incomparably cold. This is the highest peak of the sect. Do you think it's high? Wei Wei Bai looked down. The clouds and mist rolled under her feet. High, it was really high. So she nodded honestly. When Jinqian stood with his hands behind his back. His eyes were cold, and there was a sharp light in them. You have the strength of a foundation establishment cultivator. You are just a small stone at the foot of this mountain, and I have already climbed to the top of this mountain. I am only one step away from ascending to immortality. You should not be delusional and try to plant a seed of love in my heart. If his Tao was anything else, there would be no such thing as collusion, love, and children. But he was of the Tao of plants. He was heartless. If he was emotional, then he would be possessed faster than anyone else. Threads of love floated on the veins of his soul. It didn't affect him much. The big thing was, the little fox. She made his mind fluctuate and his emotions fluctuate. For someone who was about to climb the immortal cultivation ladder. This little bit of affection was almost like a fantasy story. But she didn't just leave a little emotion in his heart. He knew rationally that these emotions were not enough to make him crazy. But he couldn't not be on guard against any possibility. Otherwise, if he really was possessed, his emotional connection would be with her. Then the person he was most likely to hurt was her. Just like when he first saw her, he didn't intend to kill her. But when he looked up at her, his soul shuddered. Even though they were completely unrelated, his mind still trembled slightly. He felt that leaving her behind was destined to be a calamity for him. When an immortal cultivator reached a certain level, they would always have an intuition about unknown dangers in advance. That was why he wanted to kill her, but in the end, his heart softened. Being soft-hearted was a taboo. But he made exceptions for her again and again, even suppressing his feelings for her. When Jinqian saw that she was at a loss, he leaned over and reached out as if to touch her head, but in the end, he retracted his fingers. His eyes were cold and deep, and his tone finally softened. It doesn't matter if you're doing it on purpose or if it's your nature. You can't keep trying to make me like you. Wei Wei Bai's eyes narrowed slightly. However, he did not reveal any other mistakes. After going through so many planes, no matter how big the storm was, she could face it calmly. This was the first time she saw it in a man's eyes. Such a cold look. He seemed to want to look into her soul and see the things that she had deceived him with. Dig them all out. Wei Wei Bai's big round eyes were empty and pure. She seemed to have no idea what he was talking about. When Jinqian's cold gaze, including the look of scrutiny in his eyes, disappeared. Chapter 2392. This was a light soul-searching technique that did not cause any harm to the body. She did not know what effect her actions had had. Being close to him was also an instinctive action. When Jinqian said softly, "I am now at a critical moment. Once the 3 years are up, the power of the love thread will weaken, and I will pull it out. At that time, you will not be affected by the love thread." Wei Wei Bai finally understood. She tilted her head strangely. "You don't want me to like you?" This question was direct and sudden. When Jinqian stared at her silently for a while before nodding lightly. "Yes, don't like me. It's not good for you." These words were very gentle, but it gave people a strange and evil sense of pressure. Wei Wei Bai's delicate brows furrowed. Her ears were so fluffy that they popped out from her silver hair. She sighed. "Is it because you are standing at the top of the mountain, and I am at the bottom of the mountain? Do you think I am not good enough for you? When Jinqian paused. That was not what she meant. It was that there was a huge difference in their abilities. His emotions were fluctuating now because of her touch. Once he turned into a demon in the future, she would not be able to get rid of him. This was a huge harm to her. But if he thought so, she would retreat. So he nodded reservedly and solemnly. His voice was also a little hoarse. Yes, you are not good enough for me. The little fox's eyes dimmed, and her ears were soft. That lovely vitality had been sucked dry. She stared at him blankly, her fingers pinching the corner of her clothes, looking pitiful and helpless. So, it was too cruel. When Jinqian's heart was pierced by her gaze, there was a slight numbing pain. He looked away. I will go into seclusion for 3 years. After 3 years, I will pull out the love thread. Then, we will go our separate ways. Cut off all worldly feelings. This was the path he wanted to take. He turned around, his white robe fluttering in the cold wind. Suddenly, he heard the little fox ask softly behind him, Master, I won't disturb you. Can I like you quietly on the side? When Jinqian stopped in his tracks. His eyelashes lowered slightly, and there was a slight fluctuation in his eyes. But it was quickly covered by him. No. He said coldly, not giving her the slightest chance to daydream. It wouldn't do her any good to be involved in too many things. Suddenly, he heard a sorrowful sob. When Jinqian's body froze, but he continued to walk forward step by step. The little fox said, You don't even want me when I like you. Can you just look at me? She cried miserably and her voice was broken. When Jinqian clenched his fists tightly and finally said, I can't change anything even if I look at you. Go to sleep and wake up tomorrow to cultivate. She fell silent. She didn't even cry anymore. In the end, when Jinqian was still worried and looked back. But he saw, in the thick fog and white clouds, the girl's body was like a graceful snake. In just one night, her round and small face had matured a little, and her incomparably pure eyes had elongated a little. She was gorgeous and enchanting, with clear tears in her eyes. Like a sinful lotus flower. She stood in the thick white fog, her silver hair cascading down like a waterfall, a charm that could shock the world. It was tempting. Tempting immortals to become demons. She used all her glamour and beauty to seduce the man who was far away. Master, if you're going to leave me, can you please hug me? The little fox was an adult. When Jinqian suddenly remembered the habits of foxes. If they fell in love with a man and wanted to keep him, young foxes would use self-harm to force themselves to mature to the point where they could cause the downfall of countries. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.